His children were dying in his arms. Daniel Harlow had watched his wife take her last breath 2 years ago, and now, God help him, he was about to watch his sons do the same. The blizzard had swallowed them whole. No shelter, no fire, no hope. Just white death falling from a black sky and 3 small bodies growing colder by the minute. Then his eldest son screamed through the wind, "Papa, light!" Through the storm, impossible and golden, a cabin window glowed like a miracle he'd stopped believing in. Stay with me until the end of this story and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The wind had teeth. Daniel Harlow had lived through 29 winters in Montana Territory, but he'd never felt cold like this. Cold that didn't just bite but devoured, that turned breath to ice in your lungs and made your bones ache like they were cracking from the inside out. The kind of cold that killed. And it was killing his sons. "Papa, I can't feel my hands." Daniel looked down at Thomas, his middle boy, 8 years old with his mother's dark eyes and his father's stubborn jaw. The child's lips had gone from pink to blue to something approaching gray, and his words came out slurred, distant, like he was already halfway to somewhere Daniel couldn't follow. "Keep them tucked in, Tommy, under your arms, like I showed you." Daniel's own voice sounded strange, too calm, too steady, like it belonged to someone else, like it belonged to a man who wasn't watching his world end for the second time in 2 years. They'd left Silver Creek that morning with a wagon full of supplies and 3 days' journey ahead of them. The sky had been clear, bright even, the kind of December day that fooled you into thinking winter might show mercy. Daniel had checked the wagon wheels twice, packed extra blankets, loaded enough salted pork and hardtack to see them through to his brother's ranch in Kalispell. He'd done everything right. Then the storm came. It didn't roll in gradual like storms were supposed to. It attacked. 1 minute clear sky, the next minute the whole world turned white and howling. The temperature dropped so fast Daniel could feel it happening, feel the air itself turning to knives. The horses panicked. The wagon hit a rut hidden under sudden snow, and the front axle snapped with a crack that sounded like breaking bone. That was 6 hours ago, maybe 7. Daniel had lost track of time somewhere between abandoning the wagon and watching his youngest son stop shivering. "Papa?" Liam, his oldest at 12, struggled through a drift to Daniel's side. Snow caked his eyebrows, and the dark hair that stuck out from under his wool cap. Sarah's hair, thick and unruly, and always falling into his eyes. God, he looked so much like her it hurt. "Papa, Jamie's not talking anymore." Daniel's heart, already running on pure fear and stubbornness, kicked into something faster, something animal. He pushed through the snow to where his youngest boy sat slumped against what might have been a fallen tree, hard to tell in the whiteout. 6-year-old Jamie's eyes were half closed, his breathing shallow, and that was wrong. That was bad, because when exposure took you, the shivering stopped first, and then, no. Daniel dropped to his knees and pulled Jamie against his chest, wrapping what was left of his coat around them both. The boy felt like ice, like something already lost. "No, no, no, Jamie. James Harlow, you open your eyes and look at me." Nothing. "Jamie!" He shook the boy, gently, then harder. "Come on, son. Stay with me." Jamie's eyelids fluttered, his lips moved, but no sound came out. "He needs shelter, Papa." Liam's voice cracked on the last word. At 12 years old, he was trying so hard to be brave, to be the man Sarah always said he'd become, but Daniel could hear the terror underneath. Could see it in the way his son's hands shook as he tucked his own coat tighter around Thomas. We can't stay out here." "I know." The words tasted like ash, like failure. They'd tried to keep moving after the wagon broke, following what Daniel thought was the road, but the storm had erased everything. No landmarks, no stars, just wind and snow and darkness dropping fast. He turned them around twice, no, 3 times, before admitting to himself that he was lost. That they'd left the road miles ago, if there'd even been a road to follow. That he'd led his sons into the wilderness to die. "Just like you let Sarah die," a voice whispered in the back of his mind. The voice that woke him at 3 in the morning. The voice that told him he should have seen the fever sooner, should have ridden faster for the doctor, should have done something other than hold her hand while she burned up from the inside and told him to take care of their boys. "I'm trying," he'd told her as she slipped away. I'm trying, Sarah. And now here he was, 2 years later, failing her again. Papa. Thomas tugged at Daniel's sleeve with fingers that barely worked. Papa, I'm tired. I know, buddy. I know you're tired. Daniel pulled Thomas close with his free arm, trying to share body heat that he barely had himself. His sons felt like frozen ghosts in his grip. But you gotta stay awake for me, okay? Both of you, tell me. His mind scrambled for anything, any thread to keep them conscious. Tell me about the ranch, Uncle Peter's place. What are you gonna do when we get there? Gonna see the horses, Thomas mumbled. Uncle Peter said he got 2 new foals, said I could name one. That's right. What are you gonna name it? Thunder. Thomas's eyes drifted closed. Or maybe lightning. Hey, eyes open, Tommy. Look at me. Daniel jostled him gently. Tell me both names. Tell me which one's better. But Thomas had gone quiet too, his head lolling against Daniel's shoulder. Daniel looked at Liam, found his oldest son staring back at him with eyes too old for 12, eyes that had watched their mother die, and were now watching their father fall apart. Eyes that knew. Papa, Liam said quietly, what do we do? And Daniel Harlow, who'd always had an answer, who'd built a homestead from nothing and raised 3 boys on his own and survived every hard thing Montana threw at him, Daniel had nothing. No answer, no plan, no hope. The storm screamed around them. The temperature kept dropping. His son's breathing kept getting shallower. He'd stopped believing in God the night Sarah died. Stopped believing that anyone was listening, that prayer was anything but talking to an empty sky. But now, with his boys dying in his arms and darkness swallowing the world, Daniel Harlow closed his eyes and did something he swore he'd never do again. He prayed. Please, he thought into the howling void, please, I know I don't deserve it. I know I haven't talked to you since Sarah. But my boys, God, my boys didn't do anything wrong. They're just kids. If you're there, if you're listening, if you ever gave a damn about anything I've loved, please, don't take them. Take me instead. Take whatever you want, but please, God, please don't let them die out here in the snow. Nothing answered but the wind. Daniel opened his eyes to the same whiteout, the same cold, the same slow death creeping into his children's faces. Of course there was no answer. He was alone, just like he'd been alone since Sarah left. And his sons were, Papa! Liam's shout cut through the storm like a knife. Daniel's head snapped up. What? What is it? There! Liam was pointing into the blizzard, his arm shaking but his voice suddenly alive with something Daniel was afraid to name. Papa, I see it! I see light! What? Daniel squinted into the white, saw nothing but snow and darkness, and… wait. There. Impossible and golden and faint enough that he thought his mind was inventing it, a glow pierced the storm, weak, wavering, but there, a light where no light should be. It's a cabin, Liam gasped. Papa, it's a cabin! Someone's there! Daniel's heart hammered against his ribs. It couldn't be real. They were miles from anywhere, lost in the high country where nobody lived, where no sane person would build a home. It had to be a trick of the storm, or hypothermia playing games with his vision, or… The light flickered again. Steadier this time. Definitely real. How far? Daniel's voice came out hoarse. Maybe 100 yards? Maybe more? Liam was already struggling to his feet. We can make it, Papa. We have to try. Daniel looked down at Jamie, limp and barely breathing in his arms. At Thomas, whose eyes wouldn't focus anymore. 100 yards might as well be 100 miles in this storm, with 2 children who couldn't walk and one who barely could. But that light was there. Someone was there. And it was the only chance his sons had. Okay. Daniel shifted Jamie's weight and pushed himself upright on legs that screamed in protest. Every part of him hurt. His hands were numb. His face was raw where the wind had scoured it, and his right ankle throbbed where he'd twisted it climbing out of the broken wagon hours ago. None of it mattered. Tommy, I need you to hold on to Liam. Can you do that? Thomas nodded vaguely, already drifting again. Liam, you keep your brother moving. Don't stop. Don't slow down. You follow me. You understand? Right behind me the whole way. Yes, sir. Liam grabbed Thomas's arm and pulled it around his shoulders, taking his brother's weight. Too much weight for a 12-year-old boy. But Liam's jaw set in that stubborn line Daniel knew so well. Sarah's determination in a child's face, and he nodded. I got him, Papa. Let's go. Daniel adjusted Jamie in his arms and turned toward the light. It seemed farther now, fainter, like it might vanish if he looked away. He fixed his eyes on it and started walking. The storm fought him with every step. Wind slammed into his chest hard enough to stagger him. Snow found every gap in his clothing and turned his skin to ice. The cold had its claws in deep now, making his thoughts fuzzy, his movements sluggish. He kept his head down and pushed forward one step at a time, counting them to keep his mind focused. 1, 2, 3, 4. Sarah, I'm trying. 5, 6, 7. Behind him he heard Liam's voice, tight with effort. Come on, Tommy. Left foot, right foot. That's it. Keep going. 11, 12. Don't you dare drop him. 13, 14. Jamie's head lolled against Daniel's shoulder. The boy's breathing hitched, stuttered, and for one terrible second Daniel thought it had stopped completely. But then Jamie coughed weakly, and the breath resumed, thin and rattling. But there. 23, 24. Almost there, son. Hold on. 25. The light grew brighter, closer. Daniel could make out a shape now, a real cabin, small but solid, with smoke rising from a chimney and that blessed golden glow spilling from a single window. We're close, Liam shouted. Papa, we're going to make it. 38, 39. Please let someone be home. 40. 50 yards became 40. 40 became 30. Daniel's legs were shaking, his vision swimming, but the cabin was right there, close enough to see the details now. Wooden walls chinked with moss, a narrow porch, a door that looked thick enough to keep out the storm that was trying to kill them. 20 yards, 10. Daniel's boot caught on something buried under the snow, and he stumbled forward, nearly dropping Jamie. He caught himself against a porch post, gasping, and looked back to make sure Liam and Thomas were still behind him. They were. Barely. Liam's face was sheet white, and Thomas wasn't moving his legs anymore, letting his brother drag him through the last few feet of snow. We made it, Daniel breathed. We're here, boys, we're... He turned back to the door and raised his fist to knock. And stopped. What if no one answered? What if this was just an abandoned line cabin, that light just a forgotten lantern left burning? What if they'd made it this far only to find an empty shelter with no food, no fire, no... The door swung open. A woman stood in the doorway, backlit by firelight that made her look almost unreal. She was maybe 40, with ash-brown hair pulled back in a simple knot, and wearing a thick wool dress that had been patched more than once. Her face was weathered but kind, with lines around her eyes that spoke of laughter once upon a time. But it was her eyes themselves that stopped Daniel cold, brown and warm and sharp, with the kind of immediate assessment that only came from medical training or hard experience. She looked at Jamie first, then at Thomas and Liam, then finally at Daniel. My God, she said. Her voice was low and calm, the kind of calm that came from keeping your head in emergencies. You're half frozen. All of you. How long have you been out there? Hours, Daniel managed through numb lips. Our wagon broke. Storm came. Never mind that now. The woman stepped aside without hesitation. Get inside, quickly. Daniel didn't need to be told twice. He staggered through the door into blessed warmth that hurt almost as much as the cold. Behind him, Liam half-carried, half-dragged Thomas across the threshold. The woman shut the door immediately, cutting off the wind's howl. The cabin was small but spotlessly clean, with a fire crackling in a stone hearth and a few pieces of simple furniture arranged with care. Dried herbs hung from the rafters and shelves lined one wall, filled with jars and bottles. Daniel's blurred vision couldn't quite focus on. The boy in your arms. Lay him by the fire. Now! The woman was already moving, pulling blankets from a trunk, her movements quick and practiced. The other two as well. Strip off their wet clothes. Everything. Daniel's mind was moving too slowly, still stuck in the storm, in the fear, in the relief that was threatening to buckle his knees. Ma'am, do it! She turned to look at him, and there was steel under that calm now. Hypothermia kills. Your youngest is in the worst shape, but they all need to warm up gradually or you'll lose them to shock. Wet clothes off, dry clothes on, near the fire, but not too near. You understand? Daniel nodded, started to lower Jamie to the floor. Wait. The woman spread a thick blanket first, then helped ease Jamie down onto it. Her hands moved over the boy with quick efficiency, checking his breathing, his pulse, his color. He's alive, barely. How old? 6. Name? Jamie. James. Jamie. She said it firmly, like she was commanding him to listen. Jamie, you're safe now. Can you hear me? I need you to stay with us. Jamie's eyes fluttered, but didn't open. The woman looked at Liam, who was struggling with Thomas's coat. You, boy. What's your name? Liam. Liam, help your brother. Get him close to the fire. There, on that side. Keep him awake if you can. Talk to him. She was already working on Jamie's clothing, peeling away frozen layers with careful speed. You're doing well. Keep going. Liam nodded and turned back to Thomas, his hands shaking but determined. The woman glanced at Daniel. You. Sit down before you fall down. That's an order. I'm fine. You're not. You're hypothermic too, and if you collapse on me, I'll have 4 patients instead of 3. She pointed to a chair near the fire. Sit. Warm up. I'll get to you next. Daniel wanted to argue, wanted to help with his sons, but his legs were already giving out, and the chair was there, and he sat. The woman worked in silence for a moment, wrapping Jamie in dry blankets, checking his extremities with gentle fingers. Then, without looking up, Where are you coming from? Silver Creek, heading to Kalispell, my brother's ranch. That's 3 days' travel in good weather. Storm came out of nowhere, wagon broke. I saw the storm coming yesterday. Her tone wasn't judgmental, just matter of fact. I wouldn't have traveled even if I had somewhere to go. Daniel closed his eyes. Of course she'd seen it coming. Of course he'd missed the signs, too focused on getting his boys to safety, and instead led them into danger. Hey! The woman's voice was closer now. Daniel opened his eyes to find her crouched in front of him, those brown eyes sharp but not unkind. You got them here. That's what matters. Another hour in that storm, and your youngest wouldn't have made it. You did the right thing. I almost killed them. But you didn't. She stood and moved to a shelf, pulling down jars. You found my cabin, which means God or luck or pure stubborn will brought you to the one person in 50 miles who can actually help. I'm Marion Hale. I was a nurse before I came out here. A nurse, of course. Yes. That explained the quick assessment, the calm orders, the way she'd known exactly what to do. Daniel, he said. Daniel Harlow. Well, Daniel Harlow, you're about to drink some very bitter tea that'll help with the cold shock. Don't argue, just drink it. She was already pouring hot water from a kettle over something in a cup. Then I'm going to check your hands and feet for frostbite. Then we're going to make sure your boys survive the night. She handed him the cup. The tea smelled like pine and something medicinal, and when Daniel sipped it, the taste made him grimace. But warmth spread through his chest, and the fog in his mind cleared just a little. Across the room, Liam was tucking blankets around Thomas, talking to him in a low voice. Remember when Mama taught you to fish? Remember how you caught that trout bigger than your head? You were so proud. Thomas stirred, mumbled something. Jamie hadn't moved. Marion knelt by the youngest boy again, her fingers on his wrist, her face concentrated. Come on, Jamie. Come on, little one. Stay with us. Daniel watched her work, efficient, gentle, completely focused. Her hands moved with the confidence of someone who'd done this 100 times, but there was something else there too. Something in the way she looked at Jamie, the way she murmured to him. The look of someone who'd cared for children before, who'd cared for them and loved them and lost them. The thought came unbidden, along with the observation that this cabin was neat and clean and completely set up for one person. No man's clothes hanging by the door, no children's things, no photographs on the walls. Just a woman living alone in the wilderness with enough medical supplies to stock a small clinic. Everyone had a story out here. Everyone had reasons for the choices they made, the places they ended up. Daniel knew that better than most, but that was a question for later. if there was a later, if his son survived the night. Is he? Daniel couldn't finish the sentence. Marion looked up. His heart beats stronger. That's good. The tea and the warmth are helping. She adjusted the blankets around Jamie's small body. But he's not out of danger yet. None of them are. We need to watch them through the night. If the warming happens too fast, or if there's frostbite in the extremities, or if shock sets in. I understand. Good. She stood, moved to Thomas next. This one? How old? 8. Thomas. Thomas. Marion crouched beside him, felt his forehead, looked into his eyes. Thomas, I'm Marion. Can you tell me your favorite food? Thomas blinked at her slowly. Mama's apple pie. Your mama makes good apple pie? Made. Thomas's face crumpled. She's gone. Oh, sweetheart. Marion's expression softened. I'm so sorry. How long ago? 2 years, Liam answered for his brother. She got sick. Papa tried, but... Marion glanced at Daniel and he saw understanding in her eyes. Saw recognition, not of the specifics, but of the shape of grief itself. 2 years, she repeated quietly. And you've been taking care of them alone since then, Daniel Harlow? Best I could. You kept them alive through that storm. That's more than best you could. She moved to Liam last. And you, 12? Yes, ma'am. You helped your brother the whole way here? Yes, ma'am. Then you're stronger than most grown men I've known. Marion put a hand on Liam's shoulder. You did good, Liam. Real good. Liam's face flushed, and he looked down quickly, but Daniel saw the pride there. Saw his eldest son stand a little straighter. The next hour passed in a blur of warm drinks and dry clothes and Marion's calm instructions. She moved between the 3 boys with practiced efficiency, checking pulses and breathing, watching for the signs of shock or frostbite that could still kill despite the warmth and the blankets. Daniel watched her work and felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Something that wasn't fear or grief or the bone-deep exhaustion that had been his constant companion for 2 years. Hope, maybe. Or just gratitude that someone else was carrying the weight for a moment, or maybe something he wasn't ready to name. Daniel, Marion's voice pulled him back. Your hands, let me see them. He held them out. They were red and swollen, the fingers stiff, but when Marion pressed on them and asked him if he could feel it, he could. Sharp and clear. No frostbite. You're lucky. She moved to his feet next, efficient and matter-of-fact as she examined them. These either. More luck. You've got minor cold injuries, but nothing that won't heal. And the boys? Too early to tell for certain. Marion sat back on her heels. But I hope they'll be all right. Your youngest is the concern. He went the deepest into hypothermia. We'll need to watch him close. As if on cue, Jamie stirred. His eyes opened, just a little, just enough, and he looked around with the vague confusion of someone waking from a deep sleep. Papa? His voice was barely a whisper. Daniel was across the room in 3 steps, kneeling by his youngest son's side. I'm here, Jamie. I'm right here. We're safe. We found a cabin. This is Miss Marion. She's helping us. Jamie's gaze drifted to Marion, studied her face with a child's serious intensity. You're pretty. And just like that, Marion Hale laughed. It was a surprise sound, bright and genuine, and it transformed her face completely. The weathered lines became character instead of age, and for just a moment Daniel saw what she must have looked like before, when life was easier and laughter came more often. Thank you, Jamie, she said, smiling. You're pretty brave yourself. We were in the snow. I know. I got really cold. I know that too. But Papa found you. Jamie's eyes were drifting closed again, but peacefully this time, naturally. Papa always knows what to do. Daniel's throat closed up. He couldn't speak. Marion reached over and squeezed his shoulder, just once, just briefly, and somehow that simple touch said everything that needed saying. You got them here. You saved them. You did enough. The wind still howled outside, battering the cabin walls, but inside it was warm and safe and quiet except for the crackle of the fire. Thomas had fallen asleep wrapped in blankets, his breathing steady and deep. Liam sat nearby, fighting to keep his own eyes open, determined to stay on watch. "You should sleep too," Marion told him gently. "I'll watch over your brothers." "You're sure?" "I'm sure." "Rest, Liam." The boy looked at Daniel, who nodded. Permission granted, Liam finally let himself lie down, and within minutes he was out. Daniel remained kneeling by Jamie, one hand on his son's chest, feeling it rise and fall. Alive. They were alive. "You should rest as well," Marion said quietly. "Can't." Daniel didn't look up. "Need to make sure they're okay." "They'll be okay. You have my word on that." "You can't promise." "No," Marion agreed. "I can't promise anything. Nobody can. But I can tell you that I've treated hypothermia before, more times than I care to count, and your boys are responding well. They're young and strong, and they have someone who loves them fierce enough to drag them through a blizzard. That counts for a lot." Daniel finally looked at her. "Why do you live out here alone?" It was a rude question, maybe. Too personal for strangers. But exhaustion had stripped away his filters, and he needed to understand who this woman was, this miracle who'd opened her door without hesitation. Marion was quiet for a long moment. Then, "That's a question for another time when we're not fighting to keep your sons alive." She stood. "I'll make more tea. Try to rest. Just for a few minutes." She moved away toward the hearth, and Daniel watched her go. Watched the way she carried herself, confident but solitary, capable but alone. A woman with a story she wasn't ready to tell. But she'd saved his boys. She'd opened her door to strangers in a storm and asked for nothing in return except that they survive. For now, that was enough. Daniel settled onto the floor beside Jamie, his hand still resting on his son's chest. The fire crackled. The storm raged outside, and for the first time since Sarah died, Daniel Harlow closed his eyes and didn't dream of death. He dreamed of warmth and light, and a woman's laugh cutting through the dark. Daniel woke to the smell of coffee and something baking. For one disoriented moment, he thought he was home, thought Sarah was in the kitchen making breakfast, that the last 2 years had been nothing but a nightmare he could shake off with the morning light. Then reality settled back into place. The unfamiliar cabin, the storm still growling outside, and 3 small bodies sleeping near a hearth that wasn't his own. He pushed himself upright, every muscle screaming in protest. His body felt like it had been beaten with hammers, which wasn't far from the truth. Hypothermia took its toll in ways that lasted long after the warming. But he was alive, and more importantly, when he looked toward the fire, all 3 of his sons were still breathing. Jamie was awake, sitting up against a pile of blankets and watching Marion with wide eyes as she worked at a cast-iron stove in the corner. Thomas still slept, but his color was better, pink instead of that awful gray. And Liam was stretched out on his back, one arm flung over his face, snoring softly in a way that would have made Sarah laugh. "You're up." Marion glanced over her shoulder. "How do you feel?" "Like I got trampled by a horse." "That sounds about right." She turned back to whatever she was doing at the stove. "There's coffee in the pot by the fire. Help yourself." Daniel stood slowly, testing his legs. They held, which was better than he'd expected. He poured coffee into a tin cup and took a sip, strong enough to strip paint, but hot and real, and exactly what he needed. "What time is it?" The windows showed gray light, but whether it was dawn or just the storm filtering the sun, he couldn't tell. "Around 7, I'd guess. Storm's still going, but not as hard as last night." Marion pulled something from the oven, cornbread from the smell of it. "You slept about 5 hours. The boys?" "Jamie woke up an hour ago. He drank some broth and kept it down, which is a good sign. Thomas and Liam haven't stirred yet, but they're breathing steady and their color's better. I checked them all through the night. No fever, no signs of shock or frostbite complications. They're going to be fine, Daniel." The relief that washed through him was so intense it made his knees weak. He sat down hard in the chair by the fire and put his face in his hands, just for a moment, just long enough to pull himself together. "Hey," Marion's voice was gentle. "It's okay. You can fall apart for a minute. God knows you've earned it." "Can't." Daniel looked up. "Can't afford to fall apart. They need me. They need you alive and functional, which means you need to let yourself feel things occasionally instead of just pushing through. She set the cornbread on a trivet and turned to face him fully. I've seen men like you before. Good men who lose someone and decide the only way forward is to never stop moving, never stop working, never let themselves hurt, because hurting means stopping, and stopping means thinking, and thinking means remembering. It doesn't work, Daniel. Eventually, it breaks you. Her words hit too close to home. Daniel looked away, studying his coffee like it held answers. You don't know me. No, Marion agreed. But I know grief. I know what it looks like when someone's running from it instead of through it. And what would you have me do? Sit around crying while my boys need feeding and the ranch needs running, and I'd have you let someone else carry the weight for 5 damn minutes. There was steel in her voice now. You nearly died last night, Daniel Harlow. Your sons nearly died. You walked through a blizzard with no shelter and no hope, and somehow made it here by sheer stubborn will. That's impressive. That's admirable. That's also not sustainable. I don't need a lecture. No, you need sleep and food and someone to tell you that you're allowed to be human. Marion crossed her arms. But since you clearly won't accept any of those things, how about you sit there and drink your coffee while I feed your son some breakfast, and we'll call it even. Daniel opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. Because Jamie was looking at him with those wide, serious eyes, and Marion was already moving toward the boy with a bowl of something that steamed gently, and Daniel was so tired he could barely think straight. Fine, he muttered. Good. Marion knelt beside Jamie. How are you feeling this morning, sweetheart? Better. Jamie's voice was still weak, but clearer than last night. My tummy hurts a little. That's normal. You got very cold, and your body's still warming up. This is oatmeal with honey. Think you can eat some? Jamie nodded. Marion helped him sit up straighter and handed him the bowl, watching carefully as he took his first bite. The boy ate slowly but steadily, and color continued to creep back into his cheeks with each spoonful. Daniel watched them and felt something complicated twist in his chest. It had been 2 years since anyone besides him had taken care of his sons. 2 years of being the only one to check fevers and bandage scraped knees and make meals that were edible, if not exactly good. He'd gotten used to it, to being everything they needed because there was no one else. And now here was this woman treating his youngest son with a tenderness Daniel had almost forgotten existed, and it made him remember Sarah in ways that hurt and healed at the same time. Papa? Jamie looked over at him. Miss Marion says the storm might last all day. That's what it looks like, Marion confirmed. We're snowed in until it passes. Could be tonight, could be tomorrow. Hard to say with storms like this. Daniel's mind immediately went to logistics. I should check on the horses. We left them tied near the wagon. In this storm? Absolutely not. Marion's tone left no room for argument. You'll get lost before you make it 20 feet. If the horses survive the night, they'll survive today. If they didn't, there's nothing you can do about it now. But no buts. You're not leaving this cabin until the weather clears. Doctor's orders. You're not a doctor. I was a nurse for 15 years, which means I've patched up enough stubborn men to know when one's about to do something stupid for the sake of pride. She gave him a look that probably worked on unruly patients. The horses will be fine. Montana horses know how to survive storms. You need to focus on keeping your sons and yourself alive and warm. Thomas stirred then, making a small sound of confusion. His eyes opened, unfocused at first, then sharpening as he took in the unfamiliar cabin. Papa? His voice cracked with sleep and lingering fear. Where are we? We're safe, Tommy. Daniel moved to his son's side. This is Miss Marion's cabin. She took us in last night. Thomas looked at Marion, then at the fire, then back at his father. I remember the snow, and being really cold, and then his face scrunched up with the effort of remembering. There was a light. That's right. Daniel squeezed his shoulder. You made it, son. You all did. Is Jamie okay? I'm right here, Tommy. Jamie held up his bowl of oatmeal. Miss Marion made breakfast. It's really good. Thomas relaxed slightly. If Jamie was eating and talking, things couldn't be too bad. I'm hungry. Then you're definitely on the mend. Marion stood, brushing off her skirt. Let me get you some food, and you, she pointed at Daniel. Eat something too. There's cornbread on the counter and more oatmeal in the pot.
I won't have you passing out on me from hunger on top of everything else.
It wasn't a suggestion. Daniel found himself getting up and cutting a piece of cornbread that was still warm from the oven. When he bit into it, the taste nearly made him groan. It was good, better than anything he'd made in years, with just the right amount of sweetness and that perfect crumbly texture Sarah used to achieve, and he never could. Liam woke while they were eating, sitting up with a start and looking around wildly until his eyes found his brother's. Then his shoulders sagged with relief so profound it was almost painful to watch. "Hey." Daniel caught his eldest son's gaze. "We're okay. Everyone's okay." "The storm?" "Still going. We're staying here until it passes." Liam nodded slowly, processing. His eyes moved to Marion, who was coaxing Thomas into eating more oatmeal. "She's nice," he said quietly. "She saved us." "She did. Mama would have liked her." The words hit Daniel square in the chest. He looked at his 12-year-old son, this boy who was trying so hard to be a man, who remembered his mother with love instead of just grief, and found he couldn't speak around the lump in his throat. "Yeah," he finally managed. "She would have." The morning stretched on with surprising ease. Marion fed them all, checked them over with professional thoroughness, and answered the boys' questions about her cabin, her herbs, how long she'd lived here. She was patient with their curiosity and kind with their lingering fears, and she never once acted like their presence was an imposition. "Why do you live alone?" Jamie asked at one point, with the bluntness only 6-year-olds could manage. Daniel started to tell him that was rude, but Marion held up a hand. "That's a fair question." She was quiet for a moment, measuring her words. "Sometimes people need to be alone for a while, to think and heal and figure out who they are without all the noise of the world." "Were you sick?" Thomas asked. "In a way. Not in my body, but in my heart." "Like Papa," Jamie said seriously. "Papa's heart got sick when Mama died." The cabin went very quiet. Daniel felt all eyes on him, his sons, Marion's. He cleared his throat. "Jamie, it's okay, Papa. Miss Marion understands. She said she knows about hearts being sick." Jamie looked at Marion with complete trust. "Did someone die?" Marion's expression flickered, something raw and old passing across her face before she smoothed it away. "Yes, sweetheart. Someone died." "I'm sorry." "Thank you. I'm sorry about your mama, too." "Mama was really nice," Thomas offered. "She used to sing to us at night, and she made the best apple pie in the whole territory." "She sounds wonderful." "She was." Liam's voice was quiet but firm. "She was the best." Marion looked at each of the boys in turn, then at Daniel. "You're raising good sons. She'd be proud." Daniel had to turn away, had to focus on the fire, because the alternative was breaking down in front of everyone. And he'd meant what he said. He couldn't afford to fall apart. His boys needed him strong, needed him solid, needed him to be the rock their mother used to be. But God, it was hard. Harder every day, watching them grow up without her, knowing they'd forget little things about her as time passed. Jamie already couldn't remember the exact sound of her voice. Thomas had asked last month if she'd really been as pretty as he remembered, or if his memory was making her prettier. And Liam remembered everything, which might have been worse. Remembered her laugh and her songs, and the way she'd kiss their foreheads before bed. Remembered watching her die and being unable to do anything about it. "Papa?" Liam was beside him suddenly. "You okay?" Daniel pulled himself together. "Fine. Just tired." "You should rest more." Miss Marion said. I know what she said. The words came out sharper than he intended. He saw Liam flinch and immediately hated himself for it. I'm sorry, Liam. It's okay." But Liam's voice was small, hurt, and he moved back toward his brothers. Daniel closed his eyes. 2 minutes. He couldn't even make it 2 minutes without failing them. A hand touched his shoulder. Marion, standing beside him with a cup of coffee. "Drink this. Then go lie down for a while." "I can't." "Yes, you can. I'll watch the boys. They're safe and fed and entertained. You need actual rest in an actual bed, not 5 hours on a hard floor." She pressed the cup into his hands. "There's a small room through that door. Take it. That's not a request." Daniel looked at her. at this woman who'd taken them in without question, who'd saved his sons and was now trying to save him from himself. Why are you doing this? Because you need help, and I can give it. Does there need to be more reason than that? Most people wouldn't open their door to strangers. Most people aren't worth knowing. Marion's smile was slight but genuine. Go rest, Daniel Harlow. We'll all still be here when you wake up. He wanted to argue, wanted to insist he was fine, but exhaustion was pulling at him like a tide, and the bed in that small room sounded like heaven, and Marion's eyes held a certainty that made him believe just for a moment that maybe he could let go. 1 hour, he said. 3. 2. Fine. 2 hours. But actual sleep, not just lying there worrying. Daniel drank the coffee, wondered briefly if she'd put something in it to help him sleep, and made his way to the small room off the main cabin. It was barely bigger than a closet, with a narrow bed and a single window, but it was clean and quiet and private. He lay down without even removing his boots, and was asleep in minutes. When he woke, sunlight was streaming through the window, and he could hear laughter from the main room. Real laughter, bright and young and unrestrained. The sound of his sons being children instead of survivors. Daniel sat up slowly, orienting himself. The storm had stopped. He could tell by the silence, by the quality of light. How long had he slept? It felt like hours. He emerged from the bedroom to find his 3 sons sitting at Marion's small table, playing some kind of card game. Thomas was giggling at something Liam had said, and Jamie was concentrating so hard on his cards, his tongue was sticking out. You cheated, Thomas accused Liam. Did not. Did too. I saw you look at my cards. Boys, Marion said mildly from where she stood by the stove, no cheating, and no accusing your brother of cheating unless you have proof. He definitely cheated, Jamie said solemnly. I did not. But Liam was grinning, and so were his brothers, and the whole thing dissolved into laughter again. Daniel stood in the doorway and just watched. When was the last time he'd heard them laugh like this? Really laugh, not just smile or chuckle, but full-body laughter that shook their shoulders and made them snort? Not since before Sarah died. Maybe not even then. Those last months had been hard, full of worry and whispered conversations and trying to keep the boys from seeing how bad things were getting. Papa, Jamie spotted him first. You're awake. Miss Marion taught us a new game. It's called Rummy, and it's really fun. I can see that. Daniel's voice came out rougher than he intended. He cleared his throat. How long was I asleep? 4 hours, Marion said without looking up from the pot she was stirring. And before you complain, you needed it. Your color's better and you're not swaying on your feet anymore, so I'd say the extra time was well spent. 4 hours. He'd left his sons for 4 hours with a woman they'd just met, and instead of disaster, he'd come back to find them happy and playing and safe. The storm stopped, he observed, about 2 hours ago. Snow's deep, though, probably 3 feet or more. You won't be traveling today. Daniel moved to the window and looked out. The world was white and pristine and impossibly beautiful. The storm had transformed everything, covering the rough edges and making even the wilderness look gentle. But Marion was right. The drifts were massive, and the sky, though clear now, had that pale, exhausted quality that meant more weather could roll in at any moment. We should check on the horses, he said, and the wagon, see what can be salvaged. After you eat. Marion ladled something into a bowl. Venison stew. Sit. I'm not hungry. Daniel Harlow, I have kept your sons alive and entertained for 4 hours. The least you can do is eat the food I cooked without arguing. She set the bowl on the table with a thunk that wasn't quite aggressive but definitely wasn't gentle. Sit. Liam was trying not to grin. Thomas and Jamie had given up trying and were outright smiling. She's bossy, Jamie whispered to his father. I heard that, Marion said. And yes, I am. Especially with stubborn men who don't know what's good for them. Daniel found himself sitting. The stew smelled incredible, rich and hearty with vegetables he couldn't quite identify. When he tasted it, he had to stop himself from wolfing it down like an animal. Good? Marion asked. Very good. Then eat slowly and don't make yourself sick. She turned back to the boys. Whose turn is it? Mine. Thomas laid down a card with triumph. I win. You win one hand, Liam corrected. We're playing best of 5. I'm still gonna win. Are not. Am too. Marion caught Daniel's eye and smiled. A real smile, warm and slightly conspiratorial, like they were sharing a secret joke about these ridiculous, wonderful children. And Daniel felt something in his chest loosen, just a fraction. They spent the afternoon digging out. Daniel and Liam worked together to create a path from the cabin door, while Marion kept Thomas and Jamie inside where it was warm. The work was hard. The snow was heavy and wet, the kind that soaked through gloves and made your back ache, but it felt good to be moving, to be doing something useful. Papa? Liam paused, leaning on his shovel. Are we going to stay here another night? Probably have to. Can't travel in snow this deep, and I need to check on the horses and wagon before we know what our options are. Liam nodded, then was quiet for a moment. I like her. Who, Miss Marion? Yeah, I don't know. She reminds me of Mama, kind of. Not exactly, but the way she talks to us. Like we're people, not just kids. Daniel's throat tightened. Your mama was good at that. Miss Marion's good at it too. Liam jabbed his shovel into the snow. She's all alone out here. That must be lonely. Probably. Why would someone choose to be lonely? Daniel thought about Marion's words earlier, about needing to be alone to heal, about hearts being sick. Sometimes being alone is easier than being around people when you're hurt. It feels safer. Is that why you don't talk to people anymore? Like Mr. Henderson from the general store or Mrs. Patterson who always brings us pies? The observation stung because it was true. Daniel had pulled away from everyone after Sarah died, keeping his distance, keeping his boys close, but everyone else at arm's length. It was easier that way, less complicated, less chance of losing someone else he cared about. Maybe, he admitted. I don't know, Liam. I'm just trying to get through each day. But don't you get lonely too? Daniel looked at his 12-year-old son. When had he gotten so perceptive, so aware of the things Daniel tried to hide, and found he couldn't lie? Yeah, sometimes I do. Liam nodded like that made sense, like he understood in his bones what Daniel was admitting. Mama wouldn't want you to be lonely forever. No, Daniel agreed quietly. She wouldn't. They finished the path in silence after that, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind that came from understanding each other without needing more words. By the time they made it back inside, dinner was ready. More cornbread and some kind of bean dish that tasted better than it had any right to. The boys ate like they were starving, and Marion watched them with poorly concealed delight. When did you eat last? She asked Daniel. I mean, before last night. Yesterday morning. And them? Same. Marion shook her head. No wonder they're eating like locusts. Growing boys need more food than that, Daniel. I know, we usually do better. The trip I'm not judging, just observing. She cut another piece of cornbread and handed it to Thomas. You're doing better than most men would in your situation. You don't know my situation. I know you're raising 3 boys alone. I know you nearly died getting them to safety. I know you're so tired you can barely stand, but you keep pushing anyway. Her voice was matter-of-fact. That tells me plenty. Jamie tugged on Marion's sleeve. Can you tell us a story? What kind of story? A good one, with adventures. Marion looked at Daniel, asking permission. He nodded. And so she told them a story about a brave knight and a dragon and a princess who saved herself. Thank you very much. She didn't need rescuing. The boys listened with rapt attention, and Daniel found himself listening too, to her voice, warm and expressive, bringing the tale to life. She was good with them, natural, like she'd been meant to do this, but somehow ended up here instead, alone in a cabin in the wilderness. When the story ended and the boys begged for another, Marion laughed and shook her head. Bedtime first, then maybe tomorrow, if you're good. We'll be good, Jamie promised. We'll see. But she was smiling as she helped them settle by the fire again, arranging blankets and making sure they were comfortable. Daniel watched her move through the familiar motions of bedtime, the checking and tucking and gentle goodnights, and felt the weight of 2 years of loneliness settle on his shoulders like a physical thing. When the boys were finally asleep,
Marion poured 2 cups of coffee and handed one to Daniel. They sat by the fire in companionable silence for a while, listening to the boys breathe and the fire crackle and the wind whisper outside. "Thank you," Daniel said finally, "for all of this, for saving them, for—" "You don't need to thank me." "Yes, I do. You could have turned us away. Plenty of people would have." "Then plenty of people are idiots." Marion sipped her coffee. "I couldn't live with myself if I'd left children out in that storm." "Still, thank you." She nodded, accepting it. Then quietly, "Your son asked me today why I live alone." Jamie's got no filter. "It's fine. It's a fair question." Marion stared into the fire. "I came out here 5 years ago, after my husband died." "I'm sorry." "James was a good man, a doctor. We worked together in Chicago. I was a surgical nurse. We had a good life. And then typhoid took him in 3 days flat, and suddenly I didn't have a husband or a job or any idea what to do with myself." Daniel said nothing, just listened. "We'd always planned to have children. Waited until we were settled, until we had enough money, until the timing was right. And then he was gone, and there was no more time and no more chances." Her voice was steady but soft. "I couldn't stay in Chicago. Everything there reminded me of what I'd lost. So I came out here, to the middle of nowhere, where I could be alone with it. Did it help? I don't know. Ask me in another 5 years." She smiled slightly. "But then 3 boys and their father show up half frozen on my doorstep, and suddenly being alone doesn't feel as necessary as it used to." Daniel looked at her, really looked at her, saw the grief she carried, the strength that kept her standing, the kindness that had saved his family. Saw someone who understood loss not as an abstract concept, but as a lived reality. "How do you do it?" he asked. "How do you keep going when the person you built your life around is gone?" "You just do, one day at a time. Some days you wake up and think you can't do it, can't face another sunrise without them. And then you do it anyway because the alternative is giving up, and giving up means they died for nothing." Marion met his eyes. "But you know that already."
You've been doing it for 2 years. It doesn't get easier. No, but you get stronger, or at least you get used to carrying the weight. They sat in silence after that. 2 people who understood grief in ways they'd never wanted to, finding unexpected comfort in each other's company. Outside, the night was clear and cold and full of stars. Inside, 3 boys slept safely by a warm fire, and for the first time in 2 years, Daniel Harlow didn't feel quite so alone. Morning came too soon and too bright, sunlight bouncing off the snow and flooding the cabin with a brilliance that made Daniel squint. He woke before the boys, as he always did, and lay still for a moment listening to the quiet sounds of the cabin, the fire crackling low, someone moving in the main room, the soft breathing of his sons nearby. Someone. Marion. For a moment, he'd almost forgotten where they were, almost let himself imagine this was home, that the person making coffee in the next room was Sarah, that the last 2 years had been nothing but a bad dream. But it wasn't Sarah. It was a woman he'd known for barely 2 days, a stranger who'd saved their lives and shown more kindness than he'd encountered in months. And this wasn't home. It was borrowed shelter, temporary safety before they had to face the world again. Daniel pushed himself up and moved quietly past his sleeping sons into the main room. Marion stood by the window, wrapped in a thick shawl, looking out at the snow-covered landscape. She turned when she heard him. "Good morning," she said softly. "Coffee's ready." "Thank you." He poured himself a cup, then joined her at the window. The world outside was transformed, pristine and beautiful and utterly impassable. That's a lot of snow. 3.5 feet by my estimate. Maybe 4 in the drifts. Marion crossed her arms. "You planning to leave today?" Daniel heard the question she wasn't asking. "Need to at least check on the horses and wagon, see what shape they're in. And if they're alive and the wagon's intact, then we'll have to make a decision about whether to push on or wait another day." He sipped his coffee, avoiding her eyes. "Can't impose on your hospitality forever. It's not an imposition. Still, you didn't sign up for house guests." Marion was quiet for a moment. "What are you afraid of, Daniel?" The question caught him off guard. "What?" "You've been looking for an excuse to leave since you woke up yesterday.
The storm's barely stopped and you're already talking about moving on. She turned to face him fully. So I'm asking, what are you afraid of? I'm not afraid of anything. I just need to get my boys to my brother's place. That's where we were headed. That's where we need to be. Why? Because, Daniel fumbled for words. Because that was the plan. Because Peter's expecting us. Because we can't just stay here indefinitely. No one said anything about indefinitely. But your boys are happy, they're warm, they're safe. What's one more day to make sure they're completely recovered? Daniel set his coffee down with more force than necessary. You don't understand. Then help me understand. He couldn't put into words the panic that rose in his chest when he watched Marion with his sons, when he heard them laugh at her stories, when he saw the way Jamie looked at her like maybe, just maybe, she could fill the hole Sarah left. Because getting attached meant risking loss again, and Daniel couldn't survive losing anyone else he loved. Better to leave now, while it was still easy. While his boys could remember Marion as the kind woman who helped them through a storm, not as someone who became essential and then disappeared. I appreciate everything you've done, Daniel said carefully. More than I can say. But we need to keep moving. That's just how it is. Marion studied him with those sharp brown eyes that seemed to see straight through him. You're running. I'm being practical. You're scared. What do I have to be scared of? Of staying in one place long enough to feel something. Her voice was gentle but unyielding. Of letting your sons be happy. Of accepting help. Of, stop. Daniel's voice came out harder than he intended. You don't know anything about me or what I need. We're grateful for the shelter, but that doesn't give you the right to Papa? Thomas's sleepy voice cut through the tension. Why are you yelling? Daniel turned to find all three boys awake, staring at him with various expressions of confusion and concern. Liam looked guarded, Thomas worried, and Jamie's lower lip was trembling like he might cry. I'm not yelling, Daniel said, forcing his voice to soften. Just talking with Miss Marion about when we need to leave. Leave? Jamie's voice was small. But I like it here. I know, buddy, but we need to get to Uncle Peter's. Can't we stay one more day? Thomas asked. Please, Miss Marion was going to teach us about the herbs she uses for medicine. And she said she'd tell us another story, Jamie added. Daniel looked at Marion, who'd stepped back from the conversation, her expression carefully neutral. Then back at his sons, who were watching him with hope and confusion in equal measure. We'll see, he said finally. First, I need to check on the horses and wagon. Then we'll decide. It was a coward's answer, putting off the decision, avoiding the conflict. But it was the best he could do with three pairs of eyes watching him and Marion's words still echoing in his head. After a quick breakfast, Daniel and Liam bundled up and headed out into the snow. The cold hit Daniel like a physical blow, sharp and clean and somehow more honest than the warmth of the cabin. This he understood. This he could handle. They found the horses about a quarter-mile from Marion's cabin, huddled together behind a natural windbreak of rocks and pine trees. Against all odds, both animals had survived, though they were hungry and skittish and covered in a thin layer of ice. Hey there, Copper. Easy, boy. Daniel approached slowly, hands out. It's okay. We're here now. The horses calmed at his voice. Liam helped him brush away the worst of the ice and snow, and they led the animals back toward the cabin, moving slow through the deep drifts. The wagon was a different story. They found it on its side, half buried in snow, the broken axle worse than Daniel remembered. Most of their supplies had spilled out, some salvageable, some lost to the storm. The wagon itself was beyond repair without proper tools and lumber. We can't use it, Liam said, stating the obvious. No. Daniel stared at the wreckage of their journey. We'll have to go on horseback. Leave the wagon here. Come back for it in spring, maybe. Can the horses carry all of us? In this snow? Good question. The horses were strong, but they'd been through hell, too. Asking them to carry 3 boys and a grown man through 3 feet of snow for days of travel seemed like a recipe for disaster. We might need to wait, Daniel admitted reluctantly. Let the horses recover. Let the trail breakers get through and pack down the main roads. So we're staying?
For now. Maybe a few more days. Liam didn't say anything, but Daniel saw the relief in his son's eyes, saw the way his shoulders relaxed, the tension leaving his face. His boy wanted to stay. They all did. And maybe, God help him, Daniel wanted to stay too. They made their way back to the cabin with the horses, who Marian helped settle in a small lean-to behind the cabin that she normally used for firewood storage. She produced oats from somewhere and showed Jamie how to measure the right amount, while Thomas fetched fresh snow to melt for water. "You keep horses?" Daniel asked. "Used to. Had a mare until 2 years ago. She died of colic." Marian rubbed Copper's nose. "Haven't had the heart to replace her, but I kept the supplies just in case." Just in case lost travelers showed up with half-frozen horses. Just in case someone needed help. Just in case she wasn't as alone as she pretended to be. They spent the rest of the day in a strange domestic routine that felt both foreign and familiar. Marian taught the boys about her herbs, while Daniel repaired a loose board on the porch. They had lunch together, soup and bread, and the boys told Marian about the ranch, about their life before the storm, about Uncle Peter and the horses they'd get to ride. "Do you ever get lonely out here?" Thomas asked at one point. Daniel tensed, remembering the conversation from that morning, but Marian just smiled. "Sometimes, but I have books and projects and plenty to keep me busy. And occasionally, unexpected visitors show up and keep me on my toes." "We're good visitors, right?" Jamie asked anxiously. "The very best kind." Dinner came and went. The boys played cards again while Daniel and Marian cleaned up, moving around each other in the small kitchen space with surprising ease. When their hands brushed reaching for the same dish, Daniel pulled back like he'd been burned. "Sorry," he muttered. "It's fine." But Marian's voice was quiet, careful. The tension from that morning hadn't fully dissipated. It hung between them like smoke, visible if you looked for it, ignorable if you didn't. That night, after the boys were asleep, Daniel stepped outside for some air. The cold was sharp, but the sky was clear, full of more stars than seemed possible. He stood on the porch and breathed deep, trying to settle the churning in his chest. The door opened behind him. Marian stepped out, wrapped in her shawl. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. "Needed to think." "About leaving?" "Among other things." Daniel glanced at her. "I'm sorry. For this morning, I was scared." "I know. I already said that." Marian moved to stand beside him. "I'm sorry too. I pushed when I should have backed off. Your choices are your own. You weren't wrong, though." The admission cost him something. "I am running. I've been running for 2 years. It's the only way I know how to survive anymore." "I understand that. Better than you might think." They stood in silence for a moment, watching their breath fog in the cold air. "My brother Peter," Daniel said slowly. "He's got a good setup, big ranch, plenty of help. He wrote me last fall, said he could use another hand and the boys could grow up with their cousins. Seemed like the right move, get them somewhere stable, somewhere with family." "Sounds reasonable?" "Yeah. Except the closer we get, the more I wonder if I'm running toward something or just away from everything that reminds me of Sarah." He laughed without humor. "Pathetic, right? Can't even leave home without it being about grief." "It's not pathetic. It's human." Marian pulled her shawl tighter. "After James died, I convinced myself that leaving Chicago was about starting fresh. But really, I was just running from everything that hurt. And you know what I found out here in the middle of nowhere?" "What?" "The hurt followed me anyway, because it's not about the place. It's about what you're carrying inside." Daniel knew she was right. Knew it in his bones, but knowing and accepting were two different things. "So what do I do?" he asked quietly. "How do I stop running?" "You stand still, even when it's terrifying, even when every instinct says to move. You stand still and you let yourself feel things, and you stop pushing away everyone who tries to help." She looked at him. "You let your sons be happy, even if their happiness looks different than you planned. You let yourself be happy too, if you can remember how." "I don't know if I can." "Then you learn. One day at a time, one moment at a time." Marian's voice was soft. "And maybe, if you're very lucky, you find someone else who's learning the same thing, and you figure it out together." Daniel turned to look at her properly. In the starlight, she looked younger somehow,
softer, like the walls she'd built around herself were thinning, letting him see the person underneath. "Marion!" A crash from inside made them both jump. Then Jamie's voice, high and panicked. "Papa! Papa! Where are you?" Daniel was through the door in seconds, Marion right behind him. Jamie stood in the middle of the cabin, wild-eyed and breathing hard, tears streaming down his face. Hey, what's wrong?" Daniel knelt in front of his youngest son. "I had a bad dream. You were gone and we were in the snow again, and—" Jamie gulped air. "And you didn't come back and it was so cold. I'm here. I'm right here, buddy." Daniel pulled him close. "Just stepped outside for a minute. I'm not going anywhere." "Promise?" "Promise." But even as he said it, Daniel felt the lie of it. Because he was going somewhere, to Peter's ranch, to whatever future waited there. And Marion would stay here in her lonely cabin, and his boys would lose another person they'd started to care about. Jamie clung to him, still shaking. Marion brought over a blanket and wrapped it around both of them, her hand resting briefly on Daniel's shoulder before she pulled away. "I'll make some warm milk," she said quietly. "That always helps." She moved to the kitchen while Daniel rocked Jamie, murmuring reassurances. Thomas and Liam had woken too, watching from their blankets with worried eyes. "Is Jamie okay?" Thomas asked. "He will be. Just a nightmare." "I get those too," Thomas admitted. "About the storm. About the cold." "Me too," Liam said softly. Daniel's heart broke a little. Of course they did. Of course the trauma hadn't ended just because they'd found safety. His boys would carry that night with them for a long time, maybe forever. Marion returned with warm milk for Jamie and sat down beside them. Nightmares are normal after something scary happens. Your brain's trying to process what happened, trying to make sense of it. "Does it get better?" Jamie asked, his voice muffled against Daniel's chest. "It does. Takes time, but it gets better." She smoothed his hair back gently. "And you know what helps?" "What?" "Talking about it. When you're scared or sad or remembering bad things, you tell your papa or your brothers or someone you trust. Don't keep it locked up inside." "Like how Papa doesn't talk about Mama?" Thomas asked, with the blunt honesty of an 8-year-old. The words hung in the air. Daniel felt all eyes on him, his sons, Marion's. Felt the weight of 2 years of silence pressing down. "Tommy," he started. "You never talk about her," Thomas continued. "Not about the good stuff, just that she's gone. But I want to remember her. I want to talk about her, and you won't let us." "That's not... I didn't mean..." Daniel's throat closed up. "Thomas is right." Liam's voice was quiet but firm. "You act like talking about Mama will make it worse, but not talking about her makes it feel like she never existed." Daniel looked at his oldest son and saw accusation there, but also pain. The pain of a boy who'd lost his mother and couldn't even speak her name without his father shutting down. "I'm sorry." The words felt inadequate. I thought it would be easier for you if we didn't dwell on it." "Easier for us or easier for you?" Liam asked. The question hit like a punch. Because Liam was right, all of it was about Daniel not being able to handle the grief, not about protecting his sons. They'd needed to remember Sarah, to talk about her, to keep her alive in their hearts. And he'd taken that away from them because he couldn't face his own pain. "I'm sorry," he said again, and this time his voice cracked. "You're right. I should have. I'm sorry." Jamie was still in his arms, and now Thomas came over too, crawling into the space beside them. Liam followed after a moment's hesitation. They sat there in a pile, Daniel and his 3 boys, and for the first time in 2 years they talked about Sarah, about her laugh that sounded like wind chimes, about the way she sang off key and didn't care, about her terrible jokes that made them groan and her wonderful hugs that made them feel safe, about how she'd tuck them in at night and tell them stories about brave knights and clever princesses and dragons who sometimes just needed a friend. They talked and cried and remembered together, and Marion sat quietly nearby, giving them space but staying close enough to offer support if needed. She didn't intrude, didn't try to fix anything. She just witnessed their grief with compassion and understanding. When the tears finally slowed and the boys started yawning, Daniel helped them settle back into their blankets. He tucked each one in, something he realized with shame he hadn't done in months. Too tired or too distant, or too afraid of the intimacy of it. Papa? Jamie's eyes were already closing. I miss Mama. Me too, buddy, every day. But I like Miss Marion too. Is that okay? Daniel's throat tightened. Yeah, that's okay. Good, 'cause she's nice, and she makes good cornbread. Despite everything, Daniel smiled. She does make good cornbread. Jamie drifted off. Thomas and Liam followed soon after, exhausted by emotion as much as the late hour. Daniel sat there watching them sleep, feeling scraped raw and somehow lighter at the same time. That was brave, Marion's voice came soft from behind him. That was overdue. Still brave. She moved to sit beside him. They needed that. You all did. I failed them. For 2 years, I failed them. You survived. You kept them alive and fed and safe. That's not failure, Daniel. That's heroic. Doesn't feel heroic. It never does. Not from the inside. Marion was quiet for a moment. But you're doing better now. That's what matters. Daniel looked at her. This woman who'd saved them in more ways than one, who'd opened her door and her heart without hesitation. Why did you really come out here, Marion? What are you running from? She met his eyes, and for a moment he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, the life I couldn't have. The children I never got to raise. The future James and I planned that died with him. Her voice was steady but sad. I came here because every woman in Chicago looked at me with pity, and every child I saw reminded me of what I'd lost. I came here because I thought being alone would hurt less than being surrounded by everything I wanted and couldn't have. Did it? No, it just hurt differently. She smiled slightly, but then 3 boys showed up at my door, and suddenly I'm remembering why I wanted children in the first place. I'm remembering what it feels like to be needed for something other than bandaging wounds and mixing tonics. They need you, Daniel said quietly. I can see it. The way they look at you, the way they listen when you talk. They need... He stopped, unable to finish. Because his boys needed a mother, and he couldn't give them that. And Marion was here and perfect and completely unavailable because she'd chosen solitude and he had no right to ask her to give that up. What? Marion pressed. What do they need? Daniel stood abruptly. It's late. We should both get some sleep. Daniel! Thank you. For tonight. For everything. He moved toward the small bedroom without looking back. Good night, Marion. He closed the door before she could respond, before he could say something stupid and ruin the fragile thing building between them. His heart was hammering and his hands were shaking and he felt like a coward. Because Liam was right, he was scared. Terrified of feeling something for this woman, of letting his sons love her, of building something that felt like family only to have it ripped away again. Better to leave. Better to get to Peter's ranch and start the life they'd planned and never look back at the cabin in the wilderness where they'd almost died and almost lived. Daniel lay down on the narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, knowing sleep wouldn't come. Knowing that in the morning he'd have to make a decision, stay or go, risk or run, open his heart or keep it locked away where nothing could hurt him anymore. Except it already hurt. God, it already hurt so much. In the main room he heard Marion moving around, banking the fire, checking on the boys one last time. Her footsteps paused outside his door, and for a moment he thought she might knock. Thought she might push past his walls and make him face what he was feeling. But she didn't. She moved away, and Daniel heard her own door close softly. They were 2 people running from the same thing, living in the same cabin, and still managing to be completely alone. He must have dozed eventually because the next thing Daniel knew, pale dawn light was filtering through the window and someone was screaming. He bolted upright, heart racing. The screaming continued, Jamie's voice, high and terrified. Daniel burst from the bedroom to find the cabin empty except for Liam and Thomas, both staring at the open front door with expressions of pure fear. "Where's Jamie?" Daniel demanded. "He's gone!" Thomas's voice broke. "We woke up, and he was gone, and the door was open. Where's Miss Marion?" "I don't know. She's not here either, and Jamie ran outside, and... Papa, it's snowing again." Daniel looked out the door. Sure enough, fresh snow was falling. Not the blizzard from before, but steady and thick. And somewhere out there in the white, his 6-year-old son was alone.
Get your coats, Daniel ordered, already pulling on his own.
Liam, Thomas, you stay here. I'll find him. But Papa, stay here! He didn't mean to shout, but terror made his voice sharp.
Lock the door behind me and don't open it for anyone but me or Miss Marion. You understand? Both boys nodded, wide-eyed. Daniel plunged out into the snow, calling Jamie's name. The world was white and gray and endless. Fresh powder was already covering any tracks the boy might have left. Jamie! Jamie! Where are you? No answer, just wind and snow and Daniel's own ragged breathing. He pushed forward, scanning frantically. The cold bit through his coat almost immediately. He hadn't even taken time to put on proper layers. But that didn't matter. Nothing mattered except finding his son. Jamie! Then he heard it, a faint cry, distant and to his right. Daniel ran, stumbling through drifts, following the sound. His lungs burned and his legs ached, but he kept moving, kept calling. And there, a small figure in the snow, struggling forward against the wind. Jamie! Daniel reached him in seconds, dropping to his knees and pulling the boy into his arms. What were you thinking? Why did you run outside? Jamie was sobbing, shaking with cold and fear. I woke up, and you weren't there, and I got scared, thought maybe you left. Went to look for you. I was just in the other room. I wouldn't leave without... Daniel's voice broke. Come on. We need to get you back inside. He scooped Jamie up and turned around. And stopped. Because he couldn't see the cabin. The snow had thickened, visibility down to maybe 15 feet. He'd run without thinking, without paying attention to direction, and now he was lost, again. With his son in his arms and the cold closing in and no idea which way was safe. Papa? Jamie's voice was small. I'm sorry. It's okay. Daniel swallowed panic. It's okay. We'll figure this out. But he had no idea which direction to go. Every direction looked the same, white and cold and empty. If he chose wrong, they'd wander until exhaustion took them. If he stayed put, they'd freeze. Jamie! A voice cut through the storm, Marion's voice. Daniel! Here! Daniel shouted back. We're here! Keep talking. I'll follow your voice. We're here. Marion, we're... She appeared through the snow like a ghost, wrapped in heavy furs, a rope tied around her waist. The other end of the rope led back into the white, back to the cabin. Thank God. She reached them, her face tight with worry. Are you hurt? Just cold. How did you... I woke up when I heard the door open, saw Jamie running out, came after him. She was already wrapping Jamie in her outer coat. Tied myself to the porch post so I wouldn't get lost. Now come on, both of you, before we all freeze. She led them back, following the rope through the storm. It felt like miles, but was probably only 100 yards. Then the cabin appeared, solid and real, with Liam and Thomas standing in the doorway looking terrified. They stumbled inside. Marion slammed the door shut and immediately started stripping Jamie's wet clothes off, her movements quick and practiced. Daniel helped, his own hands shaking from cold and adrenaline. Blankets, Marion ordered. Fire needs building up. Move. Liam and Thomas scrambled to help. Within minutes, Jamie was wrapped warm and sitting close to the fire, crying softly while Marion checked him over. No frostbite. He'll be okay. She looked at Daniel. You, on the other hand, are hypothermic again. Sit down. I'm fine. You're shaking and your lips are blue. Sit. Down. Daniel sat. Let Marion wrap blankets around him. Let her press hot tea into his hands. He couldn't stop shaking, not just from cold, but from the terror of almost losing Jamie, of being lost in the snow again, of the pattern repeating endlessly. I can't do this. But the words came out without permission. I can't keep almost losing them. I can't... But you didn't lose him. Marion's hands were on his shoulders, steady and sure. You found him. He's safe. Because you saved us. Again. Daniel looked at her through vision that blurred with exhaustion and unshed tears. I can't even keep my own son safe for one night without... Stop. Her voice was firm. You're not responsible for a scared 6-year-old having a nightmare and making a bad choice. You're not responsible for the storm or the cold or any of this. You're just a man doing his best, and your best has been enough. It is enough.
Daniel wanted to believe her, wanted to accept that he wasn't failing, that the near misses didn't mean he was inadequate. But the fear was still there, cold and sharp. Jamie crawled into his lap, still crying. "I'm sorry, Papa. I'm sorry I scared you." "It's okay." Daniel held him close. "It's okay, buddy. You're safe now." "I don't want to leave." Jamie's voice was muffled against Daniel's chest. "I want to stay here with Miss Marion. Please, can we stay?" The plea hung in the air. Thomas and Liam were watching, and Daniel knew they felt the same way. His boys wanted to stay in this cabin with this woman who'd saved them and cared for them and given them something they'd been missing. And God help him, Daniel wanted to stay too. But wanting wasn't enough. The world didn't work that way. They had plans, obligations, a future waiting at Peter's ranch. They couldn't just abandon everything because his sons felt safe here, because Marion made good cornbread, because for the first time in 2 years, Daniel didn't feel quite so alone. Could they? He looked at Marion, found her watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Hope, maybe, or fear, or both. "We'll talk about it later," he said finally, "when everyone's calmed down and warm. For now, let's just be grateful we're all okay."
It was another non-answer, another delay. But it was all he could manage with his son in his arms and his heart in his throat, and Marion looking at him like maybe, just maybe, he might make the right choice for once. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, they huddled by the fire and tried to stop shaking, and Daniel wondered if running away had ever really been an option at all. The rest of that morning passed in a fog of tension and unspoken words. Jamie fell asleep in Daniel's arms, exhausted by fear and cold in the aftermath of his panic. Thomas and Liam sat close by, unusually quiet, watching their father with expressions that were too old for their ages. They were waiting for something, a decision, an explanation, some sign of what came next. Daniel had nothing to give them. He felt hollowed out, scraped clean of everything except a bone-deep weariness that had nothing to do with the cold, and everything to do with the weight of being responsible for 3 lives when he could barely manage his own. Marion moved around the cabin with quiet efficiency, making breakfast none of them had appetite for, checking the fire, doing small tasks that didn't need doing just to fill the silence. She didn't push, didn't ask questions, didn't demand answers Daniel couldn't give. She just existed in the space with them, a steady presence that somehow made the fear a little more bearable. When Jamie finally stirred, blinking up at Daniel with confusion that slowly cleared into memory and then shame, Daniel smoothed his hair back and tried to find words that would help. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Jamie nodded, then shook his head, then started crying again, silent tears that broke Daniel's heart worse than the screaming had. Hey, talk to me, buddy. What's wrong?" "I ruined everything." Jamie's voice was barely a whisper. "You were going to decide if we could stay, and I ran away and scared everyone, and now you're going to make us leave because I'm bad." "You're not bad. You had a nightmare and got scared. That doesn't make you bad." "But I should have stayed inside. Should have just waited for you to come back. Now Miss Marion probably doesn't want us here anymore because I caused trouble." Marion was beside them before Daniel could respond, kneeling down so she was eye level with Jamie. "You listen to me, James Harlow. I have never, not for one single second, thought you were trouble. You got scared and made a choice that wasn't safe, but that doesn't mean I don't want you here. You understand?" Jamie looked at her with desperate hope. "Really?" "Really. In fact," she glanced at Daniel, something uncertain in her expression, "I'd like nothing more than for you and your brothers and your papa to stay as long as you want. Days, weeks, however long you need." "Forever?" Jamie asked. Marion's breath caught. "That's up to your papa." 3 sets of eyes turned to Daniel, his sons and Marion's, waiting for an answer he didn't have. Because forever was a long time, and this was supposed to be temporary, and he had plans that didn't include falling for a woman who lived alone in the wilderness because her own grief had driven her there. Except the plans felt hollow now, empty, like something he'd held on to not because it was right, but because it was easier than facing the truth. The truth that his boys were happy here in a way they hadn't been in 2 years. That Marion looked at them with a tenderness that made Daniel's chest ache. That he himself felt more alive, more present, more human in these few days than in all the months before. The truth that maybe running to Peter's ranch was just another form of running away. Papa? Liam's voice was careful. What do you want to do? I don't know. The admission felt like failure. I need to think. You always need to think. Liam's frustration leaked through. But you never actually decide anything. You just keep moving forward because stopping means having to feel things. The words were almost exactly what Marion had said, coming from his 12-year-old son's mouth. When had Liam gotten so perceptive? When had he learned to see through Daniel's defenses? That's not fair, Daniel said quietly. Isn't it? Liam stood up, his hands clenched at his sides. We lost Mama, and it was awful, and it hurt, and I still miss her every single day. But you act like we're not allowed to be happy again, like being happy means forgetting her. And that's not true, Papa. Mama wouldn't want us to be sad forever. She'd want... His voice cracked. He turned away quickly, but not before Daniel saw the tears. She'd want us to be okay, Liam finished softly. And I think maybe we could be okay here, if you'd let us try. Thomas nodded vigorously. I like it here. Miss Marion's nice and the cabin's warm and it feels... He struggled for words. It feels like home, more than anywhere's felt like home since Mama died. Jamie was still in Daniel's lap, watching his brothers with wide eyes. I want to stay too, he whispered. Please, Papa. Daniel looked at his sons. These three boys who'd survived everything with him, who'd lost their mother and nearly lost their lives, and were still somehow brave enough to hope for something better. They were asking him for this one thing, this one chance at happiness, and he was terrified of giving it to them. Let me talk to Miss Marion, he said finally. Alone. You boys go... He looked around the small cabin where privacy was impossible. Go check on the horses, make sure they have enough water. But it's snowing, Thomas protested. Light snow, you'll be fine. All three of you go together, stay close to the cabin, come back in 15 minutes. The boys recognized a dismissal when they heard one. They bundled up and headed out, closing the door behind them with pointed quietness that said they knew they were being sent away and weren't happy about it. Silence settled over the cabin. Marion stood by the fire, her back to Daniel, shoulders tight with tension. I'm sorry, she said before he could speak. I shouldn't have said that in front of them. About staying as long as you want. That wasn't fair to you. Why did you say it? She turned to face him. Because I meant it. Because having them here has reminded me what it feels like to have purpose beyond just surviving day to day. Because... She stopped, seeming to wrestle with something. Because I'm tired of being alone, Daniel. I've been alone for 5 years, and I thought that was what I wanted, what I needed. But these past few days with you and your boys have shown me what I've been missing. We're not your family. The words came out harsher than he intended. Marion flinched like he'd struck her. I know that, she said quietly. Believe me, I know. You have plans and a life waiting somewhere else. I'm just the woman who happened to have a cabin when you needed shelter. I understand how this works. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? There was steel in her voice now, anger breaking through the careful control. Because from where I'm standing, you're looking for any excuse to leave. Your boys are happy, they're safe, they're healing from trauma, and you want to drag them back out into the cold to get to some ranch they've never seen because that's what you decided 2 months ago before any of this happened. Peter's expecting us. So write him a letter. Tell him plans changed. It's not that simple. It is exactly that simple. You're making it complicated because you're scared. Marion crossed her arms. You're scared of staying in one place, scared of letting your boys get attached to me, scared of what it might mean if you admit you want to stay too. You don't know what I want. Don't I? She took a step closer. You talk in your sleep, Daniel. Did you know that? Last night after Jamie's nightmare, after everyone went back to bed, you talked, said Sarah's name, said, I can't do this again. And I understand. I do. Losing someone you love is the worst thing in the world, and the thought of risking that pain again is terrifying. Daniel felt exposed, raw. You don't. I lost my husband, lost the future we planned, the children we wanted, everything I thought my life would be. And I ran, just like you're running. I convinced myself that being alone was safer, that never risking my heart again was the smart choice. Her voice dropped. But you know what I learned? Being safe isn't the same as being alive, and I'm so tired of just being safe. The words hung between them. Daniel could hear his own heartbeat, loud in the quiet cabin. Could hear the fire crackling and the wind outside and Marion's breathing, quick and uneven. "What are you saying?" he asked. "I'm saying that maybe we found each other for a reason. Maybe this storm and your broken wagon and everything that brought you to my door. Maybe it wasn't just chance." Marion's eyes were bright. "I'm saying I haven't prayed for anything in 5 years. Not since the day James died, but the night you showed up half frozen with your boys, I prayed. I begged God to let them live, to give me the skill to save them, and He did. And now you're here, and they're here, and I—" She stopped, pressing her lips together like she was holding back words that once said couldn't be taken back. "You what?" Daniel's voice was rough. "I don't want you to leave." The admission came out fierce and vulnerable at once. "I don't want to watch you walk away and go back to being alone. I don't want your boys to lose another person they've come to care about. And I think maybe you don't want to leave either, but you're too scared to admit it." She was right. God help him, she was completely right. Daniel did want to stay. Wanted it with an intensity that terrified him, because wanting meant caring and caring meant risk, and risk meant the possibility of loss so devastating he didn't think he'd survive it twice. But what if she was right about the rest too? What if running from the possibility of pain meant running from the possibility of joy? What if protecting his heart meant starving it? "I'm scared," he admitted. "Sarah, when she died, it nearly killed me too. The only thing that kept me going was the boys, the knowledge that they needed me. But I was barely functioning, Marion, barely holding it together. Some days I'd forget to eat, forget to sleep. I'd look at my sons and not even recognize them because the grief was so big it blocked out everything else." Marion's expression softened. "That's normal. That's grief." Normal or not, it was hell, and I can't— His voice broke. "I can't go through that again. Can't risk caring about someone and losing them. Can't put my boys through losing another person they love." "So you'll protect them by never letting them love anyone? By teaching them that it's better to be alone than risk getting hurt?" Marion shook her head. "That's not protection, Daniel. That's prison. At least they'll be safe. They'll be alive. That's not the same as safe. And it's definitely not the same as happy." She moved closer, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. "Your boys need more than just survival. They need love and joy and people who care about them. They need to know it's okay to be happy again, that being happy doesn't mean betraying their mother's memory." "And you think you can give them that?" "I think we could give them that. Together." Marion's voice was quiet but steady. "If you're brave enough to try." Daniel stared at her. This woman who'd saved his sons' lives and maybe his own too. This woman who understood grief and loneliness and the terror of risking your heart after it's been broken. This woman who was offering him something he'd thought he'd never have again. Not just shelter, but home. Not just survival, but life. "I don't know how," he said honestly. "I don't know how to be that brave anymore. You walked through a blizzard to save your sons. You carried your youngest when you could barely stand. You let yourself talk about your wife for the first time in 2 years. Marion's hand found his, warm and solid. "You're already brave, Daniel. You just need to be brave in a different direction." Her touch sent electricity up his arm. He should pull away, should maintain distance, should remember all the reasons this was a bad idea. But he didn't. He held on, let himself feel the connection, let himself imagine what it might be like to not be alone anymore. "What if I fail?" The question came out barely above a whisper. "What if I can't be what you need, what they need?" "What if you can?" Marion squeezed his hand. "What if we both can? What if this broken, complicated, messy thing could actually work?" The door burst open. All 3 boys tumbled in, bringing cold air and snow and excitement. "Papa, Papa!" Jamie was practically vibrating. "One of the horses has a cut on his leg, and Miss Marion has medicine, but Thomas says we shouldn't use it without asking, and Liam says, yeah, slow down."
Daniel reluctantly released Marion's hand. What happened? Liam stepped forward, the responsible one as always. Copper got spooked by something, maybe a branch falling from the snow. He kicked the wall of the lean-to and cut his foreleg. It's not deep, but it's bleeding. Marion was already moving, gathering supplies from her shelves. Show me. They all trooped back outside into the light snow. Copper was indeed bleeding, a gash about 3 inches long on his lower leg.
Not life-threatening, but definitely needing attention. Daniel moved to hold the horse's head, murmuring reassurances while Marion knelt in the snow and examined the wound. Her hands were gentle but confident, and Copper settled almost immediately under her touch. Not too bad, she said. Needs cleaning and wrapping, but it should heal fine. She looked up at the boys. You 3 did the right thing, coming to get me. Taking care of animals means knowing when you need help. Can we help? Thomas asked eagerly. Absolutely. Thomas, you hold this bandage. Jamie, you'll hand me the salve when I ask for it. Liam, you help your papa keep Copper calm. Everyone has a job. She worked efficiently, narrating what she was doing so the boys could learn. They hung on her every word, fascinated. Daniel watched her teach his sons with patience and respect, treating them like capable people instead of children to be dismissed. This was what they'd been missing. Not just a mother figure, though God knew they needed that, but someone who saw them, really saw them, and helped them grow. When the wound was dressed and Copper was comfortable, they headed back inside. The boys were chattering about horses and medicine and whether they could learn more about healing, and Marion was promising to teach them about the herbs she grew in summer. Summer. She was talking about summer like they'd be here to see it, like this wasn't temporary. Daniel's chest felt tight. He needed air, needed space to think. I'm going to check the firewood supply, he said abruptly. Outside, he stood in the falling snow and tried to breathe. Everything was moving too fast. A week ago, he'd had a plan. Get to Peter's, start over, keep his head down and his boys safe. Simple. Clear. Now nothing was simple. Now there was Marion with her kind eyes and capable hands. Now there were his sons looking happier than they'd been in years. Now there was the possibility of something he'd never expected to find again, and it scared him more than the blizzard had. Papa? Liam's voice came from behind him. Can I talk to you? Daniel turned to find his oldest son standing in the doorway, looking uncertain. Of course. Come here. Liam stepped out, closing the door behind him. For a moment they stood together in silence, watching the snow fall. You're going to make us leave, aren't you? Liam said finally. I don't know yet. But you want to. Daniel couldn't lie to him. Part of me does, yes. The scared part. Yes. Liam nodded like he understood. I'm scared too. Of caring about Miss Marion and then losing her like we lost Mama. Of being happy here and then having to leave. His voice wavered. Of hoping for things. Then you understand why I'm hesitant. I understand why you're scared. But Papa, Liam looked at him with eyes that held too much wisdom. We already lost Mama. Nothing can hurt worse than that. And we survived it. We're still here. So maybe it's okay to risk being hurt again if it means we get to be happy first. Out of the mouths of children, Daniel felt something crack in his chest, some wall he'd built to keep the pain contained. When did you get so smart? He asked roughly. Mama always said I got it from you. Liam's smile was slight but real. She said you were the bravest man she knew, that you weren't afraid of hard things even when they scared you. She said that? All the time. She said, Liam's voice dropped. She said that being brave didn't mean not being scared. It meant doing the right thing even when you were terrified. And I think staying here is the right thing, Papa. I think Miss Marion needs us as much as we need her. I think we could be happy. Daniel pulled his son close, holding him tight. You're a good kid, Liam. The best. Your mama would be so proud of you. She'd be proud of you too, if you stay. The implication hung in the cold air. If Daniel left, if he chose safety over risk, if he ran again, Sarah wouldn't be proud. She'd be disappointed that he'd chosen fear over love, that he'd let their son's chance at happiness slip away because he was too broken to try. But if he stayed, if he took this leap, There was no guarantee it would work. Marion was still healing from her own losses. He was a mess of grief and fear. His boys were traumatized. They were all broken in different ways. But maybe broken things could fit together. Maybe their jagged edges could align in ways that made something stronger than any of them were alone. "Let's go back inside," Daniel said. "It's cold out here." They returned to find Marion making lunch while Thomas and Jamie set the table. It was such a domestic scene, so normal and right, that Daniel had to stop and just look at it. His sons moving around this kitchen like they belonged here. Marion humming softly as she worked. Everyone comfortable, everyone content, everyone home. Marion looked up and caught his eye. Something passed between them. A question, an invitation, a hope. Daniel found himself nodding, just slightly, and watched relief bloom across her face. Lunch was simple but good, soup and bread and easy conversation. The boys told Marion about their uncle's ranch, about the cousins they'd never met, about the plans that had been made. Daniel heard the past tense creeping into their words, plans that had been, not plans that were, and knew they'd already made their choice. Now he just needed to be brave enough to make his. After lunch, Marion suggested the boys rest. They'd had a traumatic morning and could use the sleep. For once, they didn't argue. Thomas and Jamie curled up by the fire, and Liam took himself off to the small bedroom, leaving Daniel and Marion alone again. "We need to talk," Daniel said. "I know." Marion wiped her hands on her apron. "Daniel, about earlier, I shouldn't have pushed so hard. Your choices are your own, and I had no right." "You had every right," he interrupted her. "You opened your home to us. You saved my sons. You've shown us more kindness than we've known in years. That gives you the right to speak your mind. Still, let me finish." He took a breath, steadying himself. "You were right about all of it. I am running. I have been running since Sarah died, and I'm tired, Marion. I'm so damn tired of running." Marion went very still. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," the words stuck in his throat. He forced them out. "I'm saying I want to stay. If the offer's still open. If you meant what you said about having us here." "I meant it." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Every word. Because I need you to understand what you'd be taking on. I'm broken, Marion. I have nightmares. I forget to eat. Some days I can barely get out of bed. I'm not the man I was before Sarah died, and I don't know if I'll ever be that man again. I don't need you to be someone you're not. I just need you to be honest, to try, to let me help carry the weight sometimes." Marion moved closer. "I'm broken too, Daniel. We all are. But maybe broken people can build something beautiful together. And if I fail, if I can't be what you need, then we'll figure it out, together." She reached for his hand. "I'm not asking for perfection. I'm just asking for a chance." Daniel looked at their joined hands. Hers were smaller than Sarah's had been, the fingers more slender, the skin marked with small scars from years of medical work. Different, but no less real, no less warm. "My boys love you," he said quietly. "In just a few days they've come to love you. That terrifies me." "I love them too." Marion's eyes were bright with tears. "I didn't mean to, didn't plan to, but they walked into my cabin and into my heart, and now I can't imagine watching them leave." "And me?" The question came out before he could stop it. "What about me?" Marion's breath caught. For a long moment she just looked at him, her expression open and vulnerable. "You scare me more than your boys do, because with them it's simple. They're children who need love, and I have love to give. But you," she touched his face gently, "you could break my heart, Daniel Harlow, could make me hope for things I thought I'd never have. And that's terrifying. I don't want to break your heart. I don't want to break yours either, but we might. People do. Love is risky and messy, and it doesn't come with guarantees." Her thumb brushed his cheek. "But I think maybe it's worth the risk. Maybe finding each other in the middle of a storm means something. Maybe we're supposed to try." Daniel closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. It had been so long since anyone had touched him with tenderness, since anyone had looked at him with something other than pity or concern. Marion's hand on his face felt like permission to be human again, to want things again, to hope again. I'm afraid, he admitted. I know, me too. But I want to try. God help me. I want to try. Then that's enough. Marian's smile was watery but real. We'll start there and see where it goes. Daniel opened his eyes. She was so close, her face tilted up toward his, her eyes soft with hope and fear, and something that might be love, or might be the beginning of love. His heart hammered against his ribs. I haven't... He stopped, started again. I haven't kissed anyone but Sarah, not in 15 years. We don't have to... I want to. The words surprised him with their certainty. I want to, but I don't know if I remember how. Marian laughed softly. I think it's like riding a horse. You don't forget. She was probably right, but it had been so long, and his hands were shaking, and what if... She kissed him first, just leaned up and pressed her lips to his, gentle and brief and perfect. Daniel froze for a heartbeat, then kissed her back, his hands coming up to cup her face. She tasted like coffee and hope, and when they finally pulled apart, they were both breathing hard. Was that okay? Marian asked. Yeah. Daniel's voice was rough. That was okay. They stood there for a moment, foreheads pressed together, neither quite ready to step back into reality. Then Jamie's voice cut through the moment. Are you kissing Miss Marian, Papa? They sprang apart. All three boys were awake and staring at them, Thomas with wide eyes, Liam with a knowing smile, and Jamie with delighted confusion. We were... Daniel fumbled for words. I think your papa likes Miss Marian, Liam said to his brothers. I like Miss Marian too, Jamie said. Does this mean we're staying? Daniel looked at Marian, who was blushing furiously but smiling, then at his sons, who were watching him with hope written all over their faces, then back at Marian. Yeah, he said. Yeah, we're staying. The boys erupted in cheers. Jamie launched himself at Marian, who caught him with a laugh. Thomas hugged Daniel's waist, and Liam just stood there grinning like he'd known all along how this would end. Really? Thomas asked. We're really staying, not going to Uncle Peter's? Really? I'll write him, explain what happened, but yeah, we're staying here, if Miss Marian will have us. I'll have you. Marian's voice was thick with emotion. All of you, for as long as you want. Forever, Jamie said firmly. We're staying forever. And looking at his son's joy, at Marian's tears, at the home they'd stumbled into by accident and grace, Daniel thought maybe forever didn't sound so impossible after all. The decision to stay should have made everything easier, but the days that followed were harder than Daniel expected. Not because he regretted the choice. Every time he saw his sons laugh or watched Marian ruffle Jamie's hair, he knew staying was right. But knowing something and living it were different things, and the reality of building a new life from broken pieces turned out to be complicated work. The first challenge came 3 days after they'd decided to stay, when Daniel sat down to write the letter to his brother Peter. He'd rewritten it 4 times already, each version sounding more like excuses than explanations. How did you tell your only family that you'd changed course completely? That the plans you'd made together were abandoned for a woman you'd known less than a week? You've been staring at that paper for an hour, Marian observed from where she was mending one of Thomas's shirts. The boys were outside building a snow fort, their laughter drifting through the cabin walls. Don't know what to say. The truth usually works. The truth sounds insane. Dear Peter got caught in a blizzard, almost died, fell for the woman who saved us, decided to stay with her instead of coming to your ranch. Hope you understand. Daniel dropped the pen. He's going to think I've lost my mind. Have you? Daniel looked at her, really looked at her. She'd pulled her hair back loosely, and a few strands had escaped to frame her face. There was a smudge of something on her cheek, probably from breakfast, and she was wearing that patched dress she seemed to favor for everyday work. She looked real and solid and nothing like the fantasy he'd built of what his life should be. Maybe, he admitted, but if this is madness, it's the first thing that's made sense in 2 years. Marian's smile was soft. Then write that. Tell your brother you found something unexpected. Tell him you'll visit in the spring. Bring the boys to meet their cousins. But tell him you're staying here because this is where you need to be. Daniel picked up the pen again. This time, the words came easier.
He wrote about the storm, about finding Marion's cabin, about watching his sons come back to life in ways he hadn't seen since Sarah died. He wrote about being tired of running, about wanting to build something instead of just surviving. He didn't mention the kiss or the growing feelings he couldn't quite name yet, but he suspected Peter would read between the lines anyway. When he finished, he felt lighter, like putting the words on paper made the decision more real, more permanent. There was no going back now. Done? Marion asked. Done. Good, because I need to talk to you about something and you're not going to like it. Daniel's stomach dropped. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, but we need to be practical. She set down her mending. This cabin is small. It was built for one a person, maybe two. With 4 of you here, we're running out of space. We can make it work. For now, yes, but spring's coming eventually, and when it does, we'll need more room. The boys need their own space as they get older. We need storage for supplies. And if we're really doing this, building a life together, we need to think long term. She was right, of course. The cabin was cozy for short-term shelter but cramped for permanent living. Daniel had been so focused on the immediate decision to stay that he hadn't thought past the next few weeks. What are you suggesting? We build an addition, maybe 2 rooms, one for the boys, one for storage. And we expand the lean-to into a proper barn for the horses. Marion's voice was practical, but her eyes held uncertainty. It would take work and materials and time. But if you're staying, if we're doing this, we should do it right. Daniel heard what she wasn't saying. Building an addition meant commitment, meant putting down real roots. It meant this wasn't just temporary shelter, but home. And it meant trusting that they could make this work, that the fragile thing growing between them was strong enough to build on. Okay, he said. We'll build an addition. Marion's shoulders relaxed. Okay. But I don't have much money. What I had went into supplies for the trip, and most of those are buried in snow somewhere near the broken wagon. I have some savings from before, and we can salvage what we can from your wagon once the snow melts. She stood and moved to a trunk in the corner, pulling out a small wooden box. James left me well provided for. I've been living simply, so most of it's still there. It's enough to buy lumber and supplies. Daniel felt uncomfortable accepting her money, but pride was a luxury he couldn't afford anymore. I'll pay you back. Once we're settled, I can find work. We'll figure it out together. Marion cut him off gently. That's what this is, Daniel. Together. Not you carrying everything alone. Together. The word still felt foreign in his mouth, but he was learning to say it, learning to let someone else share the weight. The boys burst through the door in a flurry of snow and excitement, arguing about whose turn it was to build the fort's tower. Their cheeks were red with cold and exertion, their eyes bright with the simple joy of being children. Daniel watched them and felt something in his chest expand, not quite healing, but maybe the beginning of it. That night, after the boys were asleep, Daniel and Marion sat by the fire planning the addition. She sketched rough designs on scraps of paper while he calculated measurements and materials. It was intimate in a way that had nothing to do with romance, just 2 people building a future together, one careful decision at a time. Here, Marion marked an area on her sketch. A window for the boys' room, facing east, so they wake up with the sunrise. Sarah used to say that, Daniel said quietly. That morning light was the best light, that it made everything feel possible. Marion's hand stilled on the paper. Tell me about her. Really tell me. Not just that she died, but who she was. Daniel had avoided this conversation, afraid that talking about Sarah would feel like betrayal, like he was replacing her with Marion. But looking at Marion's open, honest face, he realized that wasn't what she was asking. She wasn't trying to replace Sarah or compete with a ghost. She just wanted to understand the woman who'd shaped the man she was coming to care for. So he told her about how Sarah had laughed at her own terrible jokes and sung off key while doing laundry, about how she'd wanted chickens but was terrified of them, so they'd never gotten any despite her constant talk about fresh eggs, about how she'd read to the boys every night without fail, doing different voices for all the characters until they were all laughing too hard to continue. She sounds wonderful, Marion said when he finished. She was, and I loved her more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. Daniel took a breath. But she's gone, and I'm still here. And these feelings I'm starting to have for you, they don't erase what I had with her. They're just different, new. I know. Marian's eyes were bright with unshed tears. James was everything to me. My best friend, my partner, my future. Loving him didn't use up all my love, though. It taught me how to love. And now I'm learning to do it again, differently, with you. They sat in silence for a while, both thinking about the people they'd lost and the people they were becoming. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, gentler now than it had been during the storm. Spring was still months away, but Daniel could feel it waiting, the promise of thaw, of growth, of things beginning again. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm. Daniel and Liam made trips to the nearest town, a full day's journey on horseback, to buy lumber and supplies. Marian taught Thomas and Jamie about herbs and medicine, showing them which plants healed and which ones harmed. The boys helped with chores, gathering firewood and tending the horses and learning to cook simple meals. And slowly, carefully, Daniel and Marian learned each other. The way she took her coffee. The way he couldn't sleep if it was too quiet. Her habit of humming while she worked. His tendency to wake before dawn and watch the sunrise alone. They learned to move around each other in the small space, to read moods and respect boundaries, to ask for help instead of suffering in silence. It wasn't always easy. Daniel still had nightmares that left him gasping and disoriented. Marian still had days where grief ambushed her, and she needed to be alone. They had their first real argument about whether to let the boys ride the horses unsupervised. Marian said yes with proper instruction. Daniel said absolutely not. They eventually compromised on supervised rides only until spring. It was messy and imperfect, and nothing like the life Daniel had imagined. But it was real, and real turned out to be better than perfect. Construction on the addition started as soon as the weather permitted. It was hard work, measuring and cutting and hammering in the cold, but Daniel found satisfaction in it. Every board he placed, every nail he drove was a promise, to his sons, to Marian, to himself. A promise that this time he was building something that would last. Liam worked beside him, learning carpentry with the same serious determination he applied to everything. Thomas was less patient but tried hard, and Jamie mostly just handed them tools and asked endless questions about how buildings stayed up. Marian kept them fed and warm, appearing with hot coffee and encouragement whenever the work got frustrating. One afternoon in late February, Daniel looked up from his work to find all three boys and Marian standing together, watching him. There was something in their expressions, anticipation mixed with nervousness, that made him set down his hammer. "What's going on?" Jamie stepped forward, clutching something in his hands. "We made something for you." It was a carving, rough but recognizable. A family of 5 figures standing together. Daniel's throat tightened as he realized what he was looking at. 4 figures he recognized, himself and his 3 sons. And a 5th figure, slightly apart but clearly part of the group. Marian. "Liam did most of the carving," Jamie said quickly, "but we all worked on it. Thomas sanded it and I painted the faces and Miss Marian helped with the hard parts." Daniel took the carving with hands that shook slightly. It was made of pine, probably from scraps of the lumber they'd bought. The details were simple but full of love, each figure distinct, recognizable. A family. "We wanted you to have it," Liam said, because we're a family now, right? Not just you and us anymore, all of us together." Daniel looked at Marian, who was watching him with her heart in her eyes. Looked at his sons, who'd somehow found the courage to hope for this, to name what they were becoming. "Yeah," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "We're a family." Jamie threw his arms around Daniel's waist. Thomas joined in, then Liam, and suddenly Daniel was surrounded by his boys, holding a carving that represented everything he'd thought he'd lost and somehow found again. Over their heads, he met Marian's gaze and saw tears streaming down her cheeks. "Come here," he said to her. She hesitated for just a moment, then stepped into the embrace. The 5 of them stood there in the cold Montana afternoon, holding each other while the wind sang through the pines and the sun painted the snow gold. When they finally pulled apart, Jamie was grinning. "Does this mean Miss Marian's our mama now?"
The question hung in the air. Daniel felt Marion stiffen slightly beside him, and he understood her uncertainty. She'd never had children, never been a mother. Taking on that role was a huge responsibility, and they'd only known each other for weeks. But Thomas was looking at her with hope in his eyes, and Liam was watching carefully to see how she'd respond, and Jamie was just waiting with his usual 6-year-old certainty that of course she'd say yes. Marion's voice caught. I would be honored to be your mama, if that's what you want, if it's what your papa wants. 3 pairs of eyes turned to Daniel. I think, he said slowly, that your first mama will always be your mama. Nobody can replace her or take her place in your hearts. But I also think, he pulled Marion close to his side, I also think that hearts are bigger than we realize, that there's room for Sarah's memory and for Marion too. And if you boys want to call her mama, if that feels right to you, then that's okay with me. It feels right, Thomas said immediately. Yeah, Liam agreed. It does. Jamie just wrapped his arms around Marion's waist and held on tight. Mama, he said, testing the word. Mama, Marion. Marion let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. She knelt down and pulled all 3 boys close, and Daniel watched her become a mother before his eyes. Not replacing Sarah, nobody could do that, but filling a space that had been empty, answering a need that had been ignored. That night after the boys were asleep in their new room, finally finished after weeks of work, Daniel found Marion standing outside looking at the stars. Couldn't sleep? He asked, joining her on the porch. Too much in my head. She leaned against the railing. They called me Mama today. Having regrets? No, God, no. She turned to face him. But it's terrifying, Daniel. I spent 5 years convincing myself I'd never be a mother, that I'd missed my chance, that it wasn't meant to be. And now suddenly I have 3 sons who need me, and I don't know if I'm enough. You're more than enough. They love you. I love them too. So much it scares me. Her voice dropped to a whisper. What if I fail them? What if I can't be what they need? Daniel took her hands in his. Then you'll figure it out and try again. That's what parenting is, a series of failures and attempts to do better. You think I have any idea what I'm doing? I'm making it up as I go, same as you will be. We, Marion corrected, same as we will be. Together. Together, Daniel agreed. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, and then Marion asked quietly, What happens now? What do you mean? I mean, we're living together, raising children together, building a life together, but we're not. She gestured vaguely. We haven't talked about what this is between us, what we are to each other. Daniel had been thinking about this too, had been working up the courage to address it. They'd shared a few more kisses since that first one, nothing rushed or heated, just gentle affirmations that this thing between them was real. But they hadn't defined it, hadn't put words to what was growing. I don't know if I'm ready for marriage, he admitted. Sarah's only been gone 2 years. Part of me feels like I should wait longer, honor her memory by being alone forever. Marion's smile was sad. That's not honoring her, Daniel. That's just being afraid. Maybe, but I'm also thinking about the boys, about moving too fast and confusing them. They already call me Mama. They already see us as a family. I don't think marriage would confuse them. I think it would make them feel more secure. She squeezed his hands. But I understand your hesitation. I'm not pushing. I need to know what you're feeling, where you see this going. Daniel took a deep breath. I see myself waking up next to you every morning for the rest of my life. I see us raising those boys together, teaching them to be good men. I see gray hair and grandchildren and growing old in this cabin we're building together. He met her eyes. I see forever, Marion. It scares the hell out of me, but I see it. I see it too. Her voice was barely audible. But seeing it and committing to it are different things. I know, and I want to commit. I do. But I need a little more time, not months, not years. Just enough time to be sure I'm doing this for the right reasons. That I'm choosing you because of who you are, not just because you're here and I'm lonely.
Marion's expression flickered with something that might have been hurt, but she nodded. That's fair. I don't want to be someone's second choice either. I want to be chosen deliberately, consciously. You are, Daniel said urgently. God, Marion, you are. I just need to make peace with some things first. With Sarah's memory, with my own guilt about moving on. Can you give me that time? Of course. She pulled her hands free and wrapped her arms around herself. Take all the time you need. But there was something in her voice, some distance that hadn't been there before, and Daniel cursed himself for handling this badly. He reached for her again. Hey, look at me. When she did, he cupped her face gently. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not changing my mind about staying or about us. I just want to do this right. You deserve that. I deserve honesty, Marion said, which you just gave me. Thank you for that. They went to bed separately that night. Daniel in the small bedroom off the main cabin, Marion in her own space. It felt wrong after weeks of growing closer, but Daniel respected her need for distance while he figured things out. He lay awake for hours, thinking about Sarah and Marion and the impossible choice that wasn't really a choice at all. Because loving Marion didn't mean he'd stopped loving Sarah. His heart had simply expanded, making room for both, for the memory of what was and the promise of what could be. Sarah had made him promise at the very end to take care of himself, to not let grief consume him, to live, really live, not just survive. At the time, he'd nodded and agreed because it was what she needed to hear. But now, lying in the dark, he realized he'd broken that promise for 2 years. He'd survived but not lived. He'd kept breathing but stopped being fully present, until a storm forced him to Marion's door. Maybe that was Sarah's doing somehow. Maybe she'd sent the blizzard, broken the wagon, led him to the one person who could help him heal. It sounded crazy, but no crazier than anything else that had happened. I love her, Daniel whispered into the darkness. Sarah, I love her. Not the way I loved you. Nobody could replace that. But I love her anyway. And I think that's okay. I think you'd want me to be happy. I think you'd like her. No ghostly voice answered, but Daniel felt something shift inside him. Some final piece of permission granted, some burden lifted. He could love Marion without betraying Sarah. He could build a new life without demolishing the old one. The past and the future could coexist, and he could be happy in both. In the morning, he found Marion making breakfast, her movements careful and controlled. The boys were still asleep, so they had a rare moment of privacy. I've been thinking, Daniel said without preamble, about what you asked last night. Marion set down the spoon she was holding. Daniel, let me finish. He moved closer. You asked what happens now, and I gave you a coward's answer, said I needed time. But the truth is, I already know. I've known since that first night when you saved my sons and looked at me like I wasn't a complete failure. I've known since you taught Jamie about herbs and made Liam laugh and showed Thomas that being gentle isn't weakness. Daniel, I love you. The words came out rough but certain. I don't know when it happened. Maybe it was gradual, or maybe it was all at once when you opened that door. But I love you, Marion Hale, and I don't want to wait to tell you that. I don't want to waste time being afraid when I could be building a life with you instead. Marion's eyes were wide, her hands pressed to her mouth. You love me? Yeah, I love you. And I know it's fast and probably crazy, but I also know it's real. Sarah taught me what love feels like, so I recognize it when it shows up again. He took her hands. I'm still scared, still processing, still figuring out how to be a whole person again, but I want to do all of that with you. As your partner, your husband? The word came out hopeful and terrified at once. Daniel took a deep breath. This was it. The moment where he either committed fully or kept running, and he was so tired of running. Yeah, as your husband, if you'll have me. Marion made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob or both. That's not a proper proposal. No? No, you're supposed to. There should be. She gestured helplessly. Something more romantic than standing in the kitchen before breakfast. Daniel couldn't help smiling. You want romance? Maybe a little. Okay. He dropped to one knee right there on the rough cabin floor, took her left hand in both of his, and looked up at this woman who'd saved his life in every way that mattered.
Marion Hale, you are brave and kind and strong and everything I didn't know I needed. You opened your door to strangers in a storm and gave us shelter and hope and love. You became a mother to my sons and a partner to me, and you make me want to be better than I am. I don't have a ring or fancy words or anything except this. He pressed his hand over his heart. Except this heart that's yours if you want it, broken and healing and full of love. Will you marry me? Tears were streaming down Marion's face. Yes, God, yes, of course, yes. Daniel stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the feeling he'd been holding back. She kissed him back just as fiercely, and when they finally pulled apart, they were both laughing and crying at the same time. Did you just propose to Miss Marion? They sprang apart to find all three boys standing in the doorway of their room, staring with various degrees of delight and satisfaction. How long have you been awake? Daniel demanded. Long enough, Liam said, grinning. So she said yes? She said yes. Jamie whooped and ran to hug them both. Thomas was right behind him, and Liam joined more sedately, but with a smile that split his face. They stood there in a tangle of arms and joy, 5 people who'd found each other against all odds. When's the wedding? Thomas asked. We just got engaged 5 seconds ago, Marion laughed. Give us time to plan. Spring, Daniel said suddenly. Let's do it in spring when the snow melts and everything's coming back to life. New beginning for all of us. Marion looked at him with so much love it made his chest ache. Spring sounds perfect. The months between February and May were a blur of preparation and anticipation. They finished the addition and started planning the wedding. Marion wrote to her sister back east, inviting her to come for the ceremony. Daniel finally visited Peter's ranch with the boys, explaining the change in plans and introducing Marion to his family. Peter was surprised but supportive, and the cousins hit it off immediately. They made trips to town for supplies and to meet with the circuit preacher who agreed to perform the ceremony. Word spread about the wedding, and their small cabin became a social hub as neighbors stopped by with gifts and advice and good wishes. Daniel learned that Marion wasn't as isolated as he'd thought. She'd helped most of the families in the area at one point or another, delivering babies and treating injuries and providing medicine. They all loved her and were delighted to see her happy. The boys thrived. Liam shot up 3 inches and his voice started to crack. Thomas lost a tooth and learned to ride a horse properly. Jamie started reading on his own, sounding out words with fierce concentration. They talked about Sarah often now, sharing memories and stories, keeping her alive in the way that mattered most. And Marion became Mama in truth, not just in name. She nursed them through colds and celebrated their victories and disciplined them when needed. She was patient with their grief and their fears, and she loved them with a fierceness that took Daniel's breath away. As for Daniel himself, he slowly came back to life. The nightmares didn't stop completely, but they lessened. The guilt eased into something gentler, not forgetting Sarah, just making peace with her absence. He learned to laugh again, to look forward instead of just back. He learned that healing wasn't betrayal, and that love didn't have a limited supply. May came with wildflowers and blue skies. They held the wedding outside, in front of the cabin they'd built together. Marion wore a simple dress of cream-colored linen that her sister had brought from Chicago, with wildflowers in her hair. Daniel wore his best suit, brushed clean and pressed for the occasion. The boys stood as witnesses, scrubbed and nervous and proud. The ceremony was short and sweet. The preacher spoke about love and second chances and the grace of God that brings people together in unexpected ways. When it came time for vows, Daniel and Marion spoke from the heart rather than reciting traditional words. I promise to stand with you, Daniel said, his voice steady despite the emotion choking him. In storms and sunshine, in grief and joy. I promise to let you carry the weight when I can't, and to carry it for you when you need me to. I promise to love your heart and honor your past and build a future with you that makes all the pain worthwhile. I promise to be your husband, your partner, your best friend, for all my days. Marion's voice shook but didn't break. I promise to be your home when you're lost and your shelter when you're scared. I promise to love your sons as my own and to honor the woman who gave them life. I promise to be patient with your healing and to let you be patient with mine. I promise to choose you every single day, even on the days when it's hard. I promise to be your wife, your partner, your love, forever. When the preacher pronounced them married, Daniel kissed his wife as his sons cheered and their neighbors applauded, and the Montana sky stretched endless and blue above them. The celebration lasted well into the evening. There was food and music and dancing, and at one point Daniel looked around at the crowd gathered in front of their cabin and felt overwhelmed by the community they'd found. These people had welcomed them, supported them, become family in the way that mattered most. As the sun set and the party wound down, Daniel found Marion standing a little apart from the crowd, looking at their home with soft eyes. "What are you thinking?" he asked, slipping an arm around her waist. "That a year ago I was alone in that cabin, convinced I'd spend the rest of my life that way. That I'd given up on happiness, on family, on everything except just surviving day to day." She leaned into him. "And then a storm brought you to my door and changed everything. The storm that nearly killed us. The storm that saved us," Marion corrected, "because if it hadn't happened, you'd be at your brother's ranch and I'd still be alone and none of this." She gestured at the cabin, the boys playing nearby, the life they'd built. "None of this would exist." Daniel thought about the broken wagon and the blizzard and the terror of that night, thought about how close they'd come to dying in the snow, how many things had to go exactly right for them to survive. Finding the cabin in the whiteout, Marion being home, Jamie pulling through hypothermia. All of it felt impossible in retrospect, like a story too convenient to be real. But it was real. The woman in his arms was real, and the ring on her finger was real, and the 3 boys who called her Mama were real. They'd survived the storm and found each other, and they'd built something beautiful from the broken pieces of their lives. "Papa! Mama!" Jamie came running up, followed by his brothers. "Can we stay up late? Please, it's a special day." "Very late," Thomas added. "Like really late." Liam rolled his eyes at his younger brother's dramatics, but looked hopeful nonetheless. Daniel and Marion exchanged glances. "What do you think, Mrs. Harlow?" Daniel asked, loving the way the name sounded. Marion's smile was radiant. "I think it's a special day, and special days deserve special privileges. But not too late. Tomorrow's still a work day." The boys cheered and ran back to join the party. Daniel pulled Marion closer, and they stood together watching their sons, their home, their life. "I love you," Daniel said quietly, "in case I haven't mentioned it today. You've mentioned it about 50 times. Marion turned in his arms to face him. "But I don't mind hearing it again." "I love you. I love you too." She kissed him softly. "Thank you for being brave enough to stay, for choosing this life, choosing us. Thank you for opening your door that night, for saving us in every way possible." They stood there as the stars came out and the fire burned down and their son's laughter filled the air. And Daniel thought about second chances, about how life could surprise you when you least expected it, about how the worst moments could lead to the best ones if you were brave enough to keep going. The storm had brought them together, but love had made them a family. And as Daniel looked at his wife and his sons and the home they'd built from nothing but hope and determination, he knew that this messy, beautiful, unexpected life was exactly where he was meant to be. The wind whispered through the pines, gentler now, carrying the scent of wildflowers and fresh beginnings. Somewhere in that wind, Daniel thought he heard Sarah's laughter, approving and joyful, and he smiled, knowing that she'd kept her last promise after all. She'd made sure he lived, really lived, not just survived, but thrived, not just existed, but loved. And in loving again, in opening his heart to Marion and letting her love his sons, Daniel had finally honored Sarah's memory in the way that mattered most. By being happy, by being whole, by being home.